Good evening and welcome to the April 6, 2022 meetings of the Lower Merion Board of Commissioners. We have 4 meetings this evening. Public Works Committee, Finance Committee, Building and Planning Committee, and Special Board of Commissioners meeting. As you will see, I am not President Todd Sinai. He will be here later, and I will be taking over until he does. Before we start, please, for all of you in the audience, please silence your cell phones, and assisted living devices are available at the front of the room. Before we do get started tonight, I do want to just take a moment to acknowledge the loss of a longtime trustee and a friend to many people in this township, longtime trustee of the Township's Pension Advisory Boards, Bart Silverman, who passed away on Thursday, March 31st. Mr. Silverman was appointed as a trustee in November 1994 and provided invaluable guidance on the Township's pension investments over the last 28 years. He will be greatly missed, and our heartfelt condolences go out to his family and friends. I ask that everyone please join me in rising for a moment of silence in memory of Mr. Silverman. Thank you very much. We will get started with tonight's work with the Public Works Committee, and I call on Commissioner Mike McKeon, the chairperson.
Thank you, Vice President Gavin. There's just one agenda item tonight, and that's a presentation of the 2022 proposed paving program. This is for information only. We're presenting the proposed paving list, and the purpose tonight is really to give the board the opportunity to provide input on this proposed paving list of streets to be either roto-milled or paved in 2022. It's projected that the bids will be open in early May and prepared for a contract award as soon thereafter. There's $1.5 million budgeted in the CIP for paving. Township also will be receiving liquid fuels funding from the state, and that comes in part from our gas tax to the state, in addition to contributions from utilities, roadway restoration. So with that, I'm going to open up to a public comment, if there is any, and then commissioner questions and comments. And the Assistant Director of Public Works, Andrea Thompson, is here remotely to answer any questions that commissioners may have. So with that, is there any, it doesn't look like there's any public comment in the room. Madam Secretary, is there any public comment online?
There's no one online.
Okay. Any commissioner questions or comments? Commissioner Zello.
Thank you, Commissioner McKeon. Andrea, Madam Assistant Director, glad you're with us tonight. So on the list, we do not see Lancaster Avenue in Bryn Mawr, which is, I guess we would call a utility construction site, but it's been called worse by many residents. And it's been going on for, seems like a year. I understand that works, you know, the goal is to complete it early fall. And I understand that Route 30, Lancaster Avenue, is a state road. So if you could just explain, is the milling and paving curb to curb of Lancaster Avenue in Bryn Mawr a PennDOT responsibility?
Since it is a state right away, it is a PennDOT responsibility to coordinate.
Yeah, thank you.
Huge video problems. Huge audio.
And so PennDOT or their contractor will be doing the milling and paving. Now here's, I think, where there is a role for Public Works. If they don't get the milling and paving done by the time the weather gets cold in, let's say, November, then we have a whole nother winter season where the road will be metal plates and full of cinders and very difficult to drive on. So as Public Works monitors the utility construction work, I appreciate if Public Works would accommodate in all ways and encourage the work to get completed in time for the mill and pave to occur prior to cold weather in the fall. If that means working Saturdays, Sundays, I mean, I think it's important to get that project get completed because it's been very disruptive to residents driving through and to the business district.
Commissioner, I can say that we will do everything within our power, understanding that it is PennDOT right away, but we will definitely continue to do whatever we can.
And your power includes your persuasive powers, I presume. Yes, the answer is yes, thank you. And then my other comment would be, what is the start date for the township work on the 2.5 pages of proposed milling and resurfacing? What's the projected start date?
Projected start date for the actual milling and paving, or the preparatory work that takes place prior?
The milling and paving.
Most times the window is between July, we aim for July, August timeframe. But since we are still moving through the bid process, we'll be able to communicate a better date that isn't a range once we move through and coordinate with the selected contractor.
Well, we should know that momentarily this evening, as it's the first item on the next committee meeting. I guess the point is that it's in everybody's interest, particularly our residents, if the majority, if not all, of the work is completed before school starts.
I understand.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner, we're not awarding the paving contract tonight. That's just materials. The paving contract actually won't be awarded until May. You're right now reviewing the list of the streets proposed for the paving program. Assuming we don't make any changes here tonight, then we will go out to bid, and you'll have a bid to award in May.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually tried to read that in the memo. I might have spoke a little too quickly, but our issue briefing states it is projected that bids will be opened in early May. Are there any other commissioner questions or comments? Anything online? Okay. I'll just add, I was very happy to see Mary Watersford Road was on the paving list. It's a very difficult road to drive down. It's been kind of a long time coming to get this done, so I was very happy to see that. And I have been contacted by a couple residents in the Penn Valley area about some of these smaller secondary roads that really look, they were in poor condition. Fawn Hill Road was one of them, so I was very happy to see that also on the paving list, the proposed paving list for 2022. With that, any other commissioner questions or comments? Any? Okay, well, this is just for discussion only, so that will close this agenda item and then close the Public Works Committee meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We will now move to our Finance Committee meeting and pass it on to its chairman, Mr. Zeloff. Commissioner Zeloff, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vice President Gavin. I will do my best to at least meet the time frame of the Public Works Committee, but I think that is an extremely ambitious goal this evening. We have 5 items on tonight's agenda. The first 4 are for action. The 5th item is a presentation on our financial performance in 2021 and the first quarter of 2022. Item 1 on tonight's agenda is for this committee to consider award of a contract that was just clarified by our manager, but for more information and detail, I'll call on our Chief Financial Officer, Eric Trout. Eric?
Thank you, Commissioner Zeloff. So this is an annual award that we tend to make around April or May of each year. What these bid results show tonight is you can see kind of the rise in prices that we're seeing across a lot of different construction-related industries, and also I'll explain a little bit more, but kind of difficulty in sourcing materials. So items 1 through 5 that are being awarded or up for award tonight to Glasgow Incorporated, who's been generally the vendor for most of the past 3 to 4 years, are roughly $52,000 or 13.3% higher than the prior year. That speaks to, again, what we've been seeing generally across the economy and inflation and things of that nature. We did not receive any bids on items 6 through 11. That has never happened in past years. We reached out to a couple of bidders. What we heard is, at least what they claimed, is lack of availability for stone. So myself and staff from Public Works got together and talked about how we're going to approach this, because some of those materials are really necessary for our preparatory work prior to the milling and paving. What we did is take a look, and our current contract actually goes through the May 1st of this year. So what we did is take advantage of last year's contract, last year's rates, and put in a relatively large order, especially if you look, I think it is item 9, which is a fairly substantial amount. About 8,000 tons was actually bid. I think we put in an order for about 5,000 tons, which is after Public Works did some work around the Kegel complex, trying to basically expand some areas where they could store that for a period of time. What we're also doing is then going back out. There's actually an active rebidding process for just those items that's ongoing right now. If we don't receive any bids for those items in consultation with the township solicitor, we would then be free to basically go out to known contractors that we know have access to the material, negotiate with them directly, and purchase the material as it's needed. However, at least at this point, with this one delivery that we've made, and then the rest of the quantities being relatively minimal, we're optimistic that we'll be able to kind of meet the needs that we need for road preparatory work and what we need, and hopefully will not be the cause of any delays. So it's a little bit longer explanation this year, but there's a lot of different factors at play. But we do recommend moving forward with these, the bids for Glasgow Incorporated. For a couple of the main items, mainly the asphalt, we did receive multiple bids. We don't think that waiting or rebidding would get us anything better. So we recommend the board move forward with these two, and then we'll possibly be bringing forward another bid for that potentially in May again. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Eric, for that presentation, especially explaining the staff plan to address those items in which the unusual occurrence of no bids received actually occurred. It sounds like a very good plan, given the fact that there is a limited or no supply of those items. This is a requirements contract, and so the quantities are not locked in. What's locked in is the unit pricing. Page 3, actually page 4 of our agenda, but page 3 of this item does provide price comparisons, and you can see the unit pricing growth, particularly versus last year, but going back to 2019, as Eric has informed us, just over last year, we're 13% higher in overall unit pricing on these maintenance materials for the milling and paving of our roadways. And as our manager explained a moment ago, this is actually not the contract to actually do the work, but this is the contract for the materials. So with that, are there any members of this committee who have any questions or comments? Vice President Gafford.
Thank you very much. They say necessity is the mother of invention, and Eric, I want to just give kudos to you and Mr. McElhaney for the idea on the stone for that, using last year's contract to get what we need for that. I think that's a really brilliant approach, and great job on that. The question I have is that, can that be carried forward kind of as a policy when we, you bid for extra materials that we may not use, so that you can have that flexibility in future years if price goes up or if we're short in terms of supply? Is that something that can be carried forward?
Yeah, and it is something that we do. We've historically always done it, especially with salt. So like the salt contract tends to kind of, the new contract I think comes in like August or September. So a lot of times we'll look and see, all right, if our salt domes and areas where we hold salt are low and we think the price is going to rise, we'll kind of make an order in the springtime, even after the winter is over. We can do it for these items as well, and we'll use it as we can. What our constraint is on is accepting the material, maintaining the material, and securing the material. In terms of at the Public Works Complex or other places. So that's kind of the constraint. And again, we did have to do some work to make sure that we could do that for this year. It's something that we'll look at for future years if it can be something that, again, we can manage operationally, is going to save us money. we'll definitely take a look at it, but it's unlikely that we'd be able to do it kind of for every material just because of a space and constraint issue.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice President Gavin. Other committee members with questions or comments? Not seeing any. Does the member of the public have any questions or comments? Not seeing a hand raised, I will move that this committee recommend to the Board of Commissioners approval to award a contract for annual supply of roadway maintenance materials to the following bidder in accordance with bids received on Thursday, March 10th, 2022, and the recommendation of the Chief Financial Officer with the approval of the Director of Public Works, in this case to Glasgow, Inc., items 1 and 4 in the amount of $344,125, and again to Glasgow, Inc. for items 2, 3, 5, and 13 in the amount of $125,337.50 for a total bid of $469,462.50. Do I have a second? Second from Commissioner O'Neill. Once again, this is a requirements contract, so this total dollar amount is not necessarily what we will spend. A motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor so indicate by raising your hand. Do any committee members object or abstain? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, that motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Turning to the second item on tonight's agenda is again for the committee to consider a contract award, this for consulting services, so it is not subject to our low bid requirements. In this case, it would be for ARP engagement and needs assessment. And to provide us with more information, I will call on our manager, Ernie McNeely.
Sure, thank you, Commissioner. We, as you know, we have received or will receive $25.5 million in ARP, American Rescue Plan funding from the federal government. We've received the first half in 2021 and will receive the second half here in 2022. The board has already acted to allocate $11.9 million of the ARP monies to capital projects, primarily consisting of $9 million to the Ardmore Avenue Community Center project, and another $1 million to the Ashbridge House conversion, some additional allocations for stormwater and for a street and sidewalk project. So that leaves you with $13.6 million of the ARP funding yet to allocate. As we talked about it, and the board chose to form a ARP engagement committee because there was a desire to perhaps gain more stakeholder input in what we do with the second half of the ARP money. So as a result, I solicited a proposal from Triad, a firm that we use as our consultant for community development block grant funding. And Triad has put together the proposal that's attached to your agenda, and that proposal is for a cost of $50,000 to run an ARP engagement and community needs assessment process, targeting stakeholders including residents, social service agencies and agencies we already fund, business community, and to try and reach out and gather for you, before you make your next allocation of ARP funds, additional input from the community to help you make those decisions. As you're also aware, the ARP funds have a limited shelf life. They have to be allocated by 2024 and spent by 2026. So particularly where we're talking about larger capital projects, you need to get those going fairly soon. So this process is set up to try and help you gain that stakeholder input. We do have Melissa Walsh and Carolyn Zappino from Triad joining us tonight remotely. They are online if any member has any questions. And of course, I am also available to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Manager McNeely. So before, I guess I will just say at the outset, and I do have a few comments that I'll save till the end, but at the outset, I would say that if we proceed with this, I think it's important that the contract be a not to exceed $50,000. It's not written that way, but that's how I will make the motion when the time comes. And so with that, do any committee members have any questions or comments for either our manager or Melissa Walsh and Carolyn Zuppino. Okay. Commissioner O'Neill.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Saloff. And thank you, Ernie, for the background information on it. And we, I'm happy to serve on the engagement committee along with a few Commissioner Kramer, and Commissioner Stevenson, and we've had great discussions around this. And the thing that I keep coming back to when we're talking about a needs assessment really comes down to use of programmatic funding for community services of some type, to community, to public, to businesses, commerce, and to social services. These types of activities are much better defined through CDBG. And I would think that if we're studying anything, this should reflect what we are doing through CDBG HUD monies. So I don't know whether there is a blending of this so that whatever results we find here won't be funding programmatic projects through ARP, but would be instead funding projects that are more to the public in terms of programmatic and outreach and things of that nature. So that's my concern. I don't know if I'm being clear on that, but I mean, I support it. I think it's super important, but what we're finding from it, the assessment itself is better placed in HUD, not in ARP.
I'm going to interpret your remarks as to include a question, so I'm going to ask our manager if he wants to respond.
Thank you.
The needs assessment portion of this process should produce results which you can use going down the road for CDBG allocations. You may use it for ARP allocations. It won't be tied to only ARP. So if we identify certain needs in the community that are unmet, and this board feels it's something that needs to be funded by the township, and it's CDBG eligible, you could certainly use it to help form our CDBG plans going forward in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's good news.
Thank you both.
Concerned. Thank you.
Other committee members with questions or comments? Commissioner Stevenson, who is also chair of the Ad Hoc Engagement Committee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for recognizing me. And thank you, Manager McNeely, for giving us the summary of this. And since I'm doing thank yous, thank you, my fellow commissioners, for agreeing to have us have this engagement committee. I think it's important, this engagement committee is important because the last time we did this ARP funding, which was unknown funding, but we've accepted this money, that there was a lot of controversy about how it should be spent, and the capital projects were very clear that capital projects were to go to it, but a lot of the other things about insecurity and those food insecurity and other needs of our community were not as clearly defined. And I know that there are a lot of folks in this community who have suffered and gone through things, and if this is the money that it should be going towards, we want to make sure that there's a format to it. I want to remind folks that the reason why we put this in place is to have a format that if someone brings forth the need, whether it's an organization, nonprofit organization, or individual needs or whatever, that we have a process. It was very clear that the township could not support running this process. And our goal is very clear that we are to put a process in place to have, after the study is done, to hopefully have a contracted connection where folks can help cipher through this for us, be the gatekeepers for us, and make sure that this money goes where it's supposed to be. So I want to thank everyone who's been a part of this process. and I look forward for us having a productive engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevenson. Other committee members with comments? Commissioner Kramer.
I support the engagement of Triad for a needs assessment, both to identify needs in our community and to conduct this process, both for the purposes of ARP and for CDBG. I disagree with Commissioner O'Neill about the purpose of the ARP funds, which include medical, human needs, and other immediate needs of our residents that result in, at least in part, from the pandemic. And that is clearly one of the purposes of the ARP funds. Some of the needs in our community are already well known, and some of these needs are very immediate and need funding on an emergency basis. Instead of waiting for the completion of this needs assessment, which could take months, I hope that there will be built into this process an expedited process to address emergency requests for funding for things like food, diapers, personal care items that many of our residents are lacking, and that this will be able to be addressed in a timely way instead of having to wait for the entire completion of the needs assessment.
Thank you, Commissioner Kramer. Other members of this committee with comments or questions? Other Commissioner Kramer.
Thank you. I support this proposal for the reasons that everyone on the committee has mentioned. And in addition,
Commissioner Kramer, could you speak into your microphone?
Sure. I kind of think we're getting a 3-for-1 deal by using this, by doing this needs assessment in this way. We're getting the ARP assessment of need in the community. We're doing we're doing outreach to the business community, which is a key tenet or a key goal of the Economic Development Committee. And we're also doing, a needs, businesses, neighborhood needs, okay, not two for one, 2-for-1 deal. So I think it ticks a lot of boxes. I think it brings a lot of value, and I think it's a good use of the funds. I think it's something that can help us understand the needs of the community for the coming years. I think it's worth the time.
Thank you, Commissioner Kramer. From afar, Commissioner Churchill.
Thank you. I just wanted to know the timeline. If we approve going forward tonight, when are we going to get a recommendation?
The
Manager McNeely?
proposal from Triad shows us as getting a report by the end of July, assuming we proceed with this contract approval here in April.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Churchill. Vice President Gavrin.
Great, thank you very much. A couple of questions, Ernie. Commissioner Churchill just said a timeline for a recommendation. Are we getting a recommendation for them, or what is the actual output of this project?
The output should be an assessment of needs and so to speak, a list of needs that we heard as we went through the engagement process that we would have Triad conduct for us. You would then, of course, take that list of needs and begin to decide how you want to perhaps address those needs with ARP funding first and perhaps CDBG funding in addition.
So we don't, I just want to make sure, or to clarify, so there's not going to be a recommendation on how to spend the money or any value judgment given to any of these needs, or just more of a listing of needs and an understanding of what's out there?
We are not asking Triad to say the first thing you should fund is this and the second thing you should fund is this. That'll be a goal setting that you will have to do as the Board of Commissioners. What you'll get is what we heard as a listing of needs and good ideas from the business community, the residential community, our nonprofit stakeholders. You'll get a list.
Right. Okay, that's wonderful to hear, because I think if this board, which was the policy-making board, kind of outsourced the policy piece of it, that would concern me. If it's really to, beat the bushes and get good ideas and do that outreach, I'm a lot more comfortable with that. The other question I have, I know we're talking about phase 1 here. There was a number that concerned me a little bit. In phase 2, it said typical for phase 2, which is kind of managing this, could be 5% of the amount spent. And if we're looking at 13.6 million, that's a $680,000 cost if we are outsourcing that piece. Do you think there is a real possibility of a need for that phase 2 project, or how does that come into play?
I think at this point, we don't pay a whole lot of attention to the phase 2 piece, because until we know how you're going to allocate the $13 million, we don't really understand how much of, say, triad services to monitor subrecipients may be needed. I don't know if you want Melissa or Carolyn to say anything further about that, but phase 2 is really such an unknown at this point. All they've said is one of their typical charge for running projects, and that can be anything from capital to grant subrecipients, is 5% of the proceeds.
Okay. I'd love to hear from the representatives from Triad their thoughts on kind of how does that work typically for phase 2.
So Melissa or Carolyn, if you'd like to respond, now would be a good time.
Sure, thank you. Well, so first of all, I thank you, Ernie, and the commissioners.
Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm sorry. My name's Carolyn. I'm the president of Triad Associates. Ernie, thank you for your review of our proposal and the plan. It was definitely an exceptional summary. And to the commissioners, we really do appreciate this opportunity, first to prepare the proposal and hopefully work together with you on this initiative. We definitely value all of your thoughts and insights, as it relates to the critical need to include the community in this development and preparing the plan. And then, of course, duly noted with the potential for more emergent needs. I did hear there was a desire to have the contract updated to reflect this, that it would build not to exceed. That's an easy fix, and we can definitely do that. As it relates to phase 2, Ernie did say, we kept it general. The 5% is just the maximum that the program will allow to bill for the administrative services. It depends on the type of programs that are identified. So if there is construction projects and all of the related administration, everything from preparing the bid packages, performing all the wage compliance, and then preparing the reimbursement packages. And then on the programmatic side, again, it just depends on how many projects and programs are identified. And once we're able to do that, and the committee comes up with the plan based on the insights that we provide, we could certainly drill down and give up an exact cost and a better recommendation on that. Frankly, we recognize the importance of these funds and the impact that it's going to make to all of the communities that have been impacted. We've all been impacted by the COVID-19. So we want to make sure that certainly we can cover our time, but to the extent that we can keep as many resources available to the community as possible, we will be judicious with our estimates.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Vice President Gavin, I think that responds to the question that you raised.
And just thank you very much for that. And thank you for all the work that you have done with our township, with our CDBG grants, because really we found a great partner, and we're really grateful for that. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you both. President Sinai.
Thank you, Commissioner Zeloff. So I would like to thank our ARP Outreach Committee, our finance committees, for their hard work on this. I think what we're trying to do as a board is really come up with a list of possibilities, a complete list of possibilities that we can then deliberate on and decide what are going to be our priorities. And I will say, we are in the enviable position of having been allocated a fair amount of ARP funds And part of that allocation is as clear the federal government has tasked the local municipalities in part with putting in place some of the federal government's agenda with at least some portion of that money, right? And so that makes a lot of sense from a policy perspective. You want to fund things at the national level and implement them at the local level where people have a better sense of what's actually needed. But that puts the onus on us to figure out exactly what is needed, if to the extent that things are even needed, right? We need to figure that out. And so it makes sense to spend the federal money to actually help us figure out how to allocate the federal money. And I think that is what we are doing here. And I think it is a set of resources that will help this board and the committees in that exercise. So I think it's extremely a worthwhile thing to do, and it's probably money well spent. The other thing that I should note is that this is in part an element of the process that we as a board set up to try and have a really thorough process for sourcing with, from the broad gamut of things that can be done with ARP funds. Because that can be used for a number of things. It can be used for revenue replacement. It can be used for capital projects. It can be used for stormwater. It can be used for needs in the community. There are a series of things that can be used for. And so we really have a two-part approach to this, right? So we have an ARP outreach committee that's looking for sourcing those needs broadly. And that generates a set of stuff to the finance committee, because in part, there's a question of the total ARP money, how do we allocate that to different buckets? Okay? And then the finance committee is tasked with working on that overall allocation. And so this is the outreach for what is probably a subset of this money. And there's a fairly lengthy process before it even gets to this board to make decisions. So we have well-founded recommendations from people who have thought very deeply about this on the Board of Commissioners, from the ARP Outreach Committee and from the Finance Committee. I will note, just briefly, also in response to Commissioner Kramer, that same process is used for expedited requests, right? That it goes to the ARP Outreach Committee, and then if it were to go through that committee, it'd be brought to the Finance Committee for evaluation and recommendation to the board. And that is the process that we use, because an expedited request, unlike what we are sourcing through the ARP outreach and through the Finance Committee's decisions, where everything is there together to be evaluated against one another, right? Anything that's done before that is kind of evaluated against the field, right? That we don't know yet, right? And so it should go through the same committee process as everything else. And if those committees bring it forward to the board as something that is truly deserving of expedited treatment, this board will hear it, right? So we have that process in place. I just want to make that clear for everyone who is paying attention to this, that is something that we thought about, and we have a mechanism in place for doing it. Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner Zoll.
Thank you, President Sinai, especially for outlining what's to come. I think so far the Engagement Committee has been doing the work. The Finance Committee work is yet to come. And so we look forward to that. And are there other committee members who have questions or comments, including those who have just arrived? We are on the second item on the agenda, which is the needs assessment consideration for contract award to Triad Associates. Commissioners Whalen or Bernheim, now would be a time for you to weigh in if you wish to. And while you're considering that, I will ask if there's any members of the public who wish to come forward on this item, because there aren't many here in the room. And Jody, I don't believe, are there any online? No. Okay.
Well, if Commissioner Whalen declines, I will be glad to do so.
Okay.
So I feel a little bit guilty about doing this, in that just being able to arrive for because of some other conflicts at this point, and not knowing that which has been stated. So with that predicate and somewhat excuse, as I looked at this, I had some concerns about whether this is something that is absolutely necessary. In that, when we first commenced upon the ARP funds and a determination how to go forth and utilize them, we'd set up a committee, and that committee collated from each of the members of this board certain suggestions that they had on how to utilize the funds. And each member of this board branched out and reached out into the community through their own avenues in order to get whatever feedback that they wanted to get. And we tapped into the expertise of our staff as well as the expertise of those members that had been on this board, some for over a decade in understanding the township. And now I take a look at this proposal of having somebody else to come forth, and it says to me that it is somewhat of a reaction to some community comments that we were not, we did not have enough outreach into the community to get feedback from them before we made decisions. And I view that criticism as constructive criticism, but for each of those critics, all good tensions being behind them, not one, and I repeat, not one, was able to set forth a program, concept, or potential use for the funds that had not been considered. Therefore, to go forth, excuse me, someone down the wrong pipe, to go forth and seek out an agency to give us information that our own internal expertise and our own efforts to reach out to the community, and widely so, has already brought forth, I am not sure that it is value added. And when I look at the deliverables in the contract, and the first is learn the community. So we are going to be paying somebody to learn who we are. We are already those experts. And I don't know that we need someone else. So in light of the fact that, I'll use this analogy since I'm scheduled to pick a jury tomorrow, first time in over 2 years that that's happening. You know, somebody once asked me, said, do you use a jury consultant? To which I say, I don't need external people to tell me how to do my job. That is where my expertise comes in. And here, I think we're getting somebody, or potentially looking to get someone to tell us how to do our job, and they're not going to add to us that which I believe we already can do. So I'm going to end with the apology is I don't know what was stated on the front end, and I feel a little bit guilty of bringing this forth without having heard that presentation, but timing being timing, you'll please accept my apologies and my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Bernheim. Other committee members with comments or questions? Seeing none.
Commissioner McKeon.
Commissioner McKeon.
I'll be brief, thank you. I came out, I think, very similar to Commissioner Bernheim when I read through this and I saw we're paying potentially up to $50,000 and there's only 2 public meetings listed here. And you look at the problem of public outreach and what the goal of this is trying to accomplish. But what I heard tonight in the meeting and is really swaying me, hearing from the subcommittee members, from Commissioner Kramer, Commissioner Stevenson, Commissioner O'Neill, I defer a lot to the expertise of the subcommittee. They have to roll up their sleeves, figure out ways to solve the problems, and when they come out and give very consistent comments, I think, about the need for something like this, that to me is very compelling. So hearing the presentation tonight from the ARP, the ad hoc committee members, I can appreciate where they're coming from and the difficulties, and I see what this is trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Commissioner McKeon. Commissioner Stevenson for a very brief second shot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Zala. I just want to go on record that Commissioner McKeon yielded his time to me. I just wanted to say to Commissioner Bernheim, in response to your comments, I appreciate your comments, but I'd just like to say that the reason why this was a part of it is that this is a result of the unknowns that happened after COVID. And I would say that while I think that the 14 of us and the members of the staff have a great, excellent understanding of our communities, I would disagree that we have a good understanding of the impact of COVID and the impact that it's had on these communities. And I think that we would do due diligence when people have come out and asked us to address issues that we haven't traditionally done, and we have funding that is the government has given us to address the needs of our communities, I think we are doing the right thing by using this process and using a company that is going to put it in an objective way versus because honestly, people have come before us and said that we were very subjective, and I took issue with that because I work with everyone on this board. I will vouch for all of you, including Mike McKeon, that you have done everything possible in the best interest of this community. And when people came here and said that, then I take issue with that. So therefore, I was one of the people who went to the president and said that we need to have a process that makes this more objective, makes this very transparent, where the people here will see that the work that we've done, and I think that at the end of this, that we will have a result where we can still, at the end, as the Vice President asked, who's going to make this decision? We will still make the decision, but we'll have the information in front of us that we need to make it in a better way. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevenson. I think that's very helpful. So I think also helpful, Vice President Gavrin's clarification, we're not seeking nor paying for recommendations. We are, with this contract, collecting input. We'll receive a list, and it won't be a list with value judgments because we're the governing body and we make those judgments. And we'll have judgments from the Engagement Committee and judgments from the Finance Committee, and then the board will take action. I think on this scope of work, there are more tasks than needed, that I'm uncomfortable with the number of tasks, but an objective third party, which is what we would be paying for with Triad, I think can be beneficial as we proceed with the allocation work. And Triad does not come in with no knowledge of Lower Merion Township. I don't really want to pay Triad a lot to talk to us because we know what we have done work, but Triad does know this community, having served as our consultant on our annual roughly $1 million CDBG allocation that we've had for many, many years, and that we, with staff input, allocate, I think, very effectively. But this is a phase one needs assessment. We are not acting on a phase two as described here. I'm more skeptical of that because that seems to me to be providing reporting to government agencies, and I think we're pretty good at that. But that's, as our manager said, to be dealt with at another time. This contract, if we proceed, will be overseen by our manager and assistant manager, and I find that to be the right place for this. I will support it, and therefore I will move that this committee recommend to the Board of Commissioners approval to award a contract for American Rescue Plan Engagement and Needs Assessment Services to Triad Associates with the recommendation of the Chief Financial Officer and the Township Manager in an amount not to exceed $50,000. Do I have a second? Commissioners Kramer and Kramer second. The motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor so indicate by raising your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? One abstention. Madam Secretary, the motion passes unanimously with one abstention. Moving on to item 3 on tonight's Finance Committee agenda, an item that will be presumably somewhat less time-consuming, will be for this committee to authorize disposal of surplus township equipment. And for that, I will call on our Assistant Director of Finance, Chris Welby.
Thank you, Commissioner. Consideration for recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, approval authorizing to dispose of surplus township equipment by public auction, or in the event of unsatisfactory or lack of bids, the CFO shall have the authority to arrange for disposal or rebid at a future date.
Thank you. Chris, can you comment on one item, and if you can't, maybe our manager can, looking at the relatively short list of equipment and vehicles scheduled for disposal. The scheduled replacement year column has one item, and it is a crack sealer, presumably to seal cracks in our roadways, but is not scheduled to be replaced for 4 more years. So why is it on the list of equipment to be disposed of?
Sure. We had held a discussion with our fleet supervisor on that very issue, and he had indicated that this crack sealer, in his words, had a material tank failure, meaning that it would cost more to fix that than to buy a new piece of equipment. So he said it's not a practical fix for this.
Okay, thank you. Do any members of this committee have any questions or comments for Chris? Seeing none, do any members of the public have any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll move that the Finance Committee recommend to the Board of Commissioners the approval for the authorization to dispose of surplus township equipment by public auction, or in the event of unsatisfactory or lack of bids, the Chief Financial Officer shall have the authority to arrange for disposal or rebid at a future date. Do I have a second? Vice President Gavin seconds. The motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor so indicate by raising your hand. Thank you. Any objection? Any abstentions? Madam Secretary, that motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
The fourth item and final item in which we will be asked to vote this evening is an authorization to advertise an ordinance regarding our sanitary sewer rental rate for this year of 2022. So I'll call again on our Chief Financial Officer, Eric Traub.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. So you have a draft ordinance, an issue briefing, and also a presentation in front of you. I'm going to kind of quickly run through the presentation and then open it up for any Commissioner questions. So the sanitary sewer fund, it's an enterprise fund. Those fees are set at cost recovery, and as you can see, the township code basically says what the board has to set a rate to cover in terms of expenses. Everything in terms of the fee is based upon annual aqua readings for the prior calendar year. What you're basically seeing here is just some of the basics about the fund, what it covers, which is all the pump stations, all the pipes, all the people who are working on it, the debt service, and all the maintenance that goes into it. The revenues for the sanitary sewer fund projected for 2022 at about $8.5 million, modest increase compared to the prior year. Really, the sanitary sewer fund rate is, basically 90% of the revenue. We do have strong collection. That's thanks to our residents. In terms of, they generally pay their bills and pay them on time. The billing overall fluctuates with water consumption and water conservation efforts, and COVID has kind of taken has made an impact on that as well. We kind of had pretty much stable to a little bit declining consumption. We've actually had it increase a little bit if you look back over the last couple of years, and that's probably more people staying at home and more usage, especially when you think about the number of people that might have been commuting into the city of Philadelphia at one point who are now potentially working from home. We do have a credit provision for water that does not go into the sewer system. Sometimes up to about 70 million gallons are excluded from the annual billing through the special meter program. When you look at the rental fee, it hasn't been changed since 2012. You can see how the billable water consumption has changed over the last 10 years. We have a slight increase that we're predicting at this point. We do have still some final adjustments due to some special meters and things of that nature, so we might end up around 1.61. We could end up maybe as high as maybe 1.63, 1.635 when all is said and done. The expenditures of the fund are really pretty simple. There's three principal expenditures. One is the treatment costs that we pay to the Philadelphia Water Department, which is where the township's wastewater flows. Second is the people who are working in the sewer department, their salaries and benefits. And third is the annual debt service. Those are the three big slices, basically about 75%. Another almost 20% is the general fund indirect cost, so that's the cost that the sewer fund pays to the general fund for the people in finance, the people in HR, the people in IT that help them do their jobs, since the enterprise fund has to fully recover all costs. Utilities, obviously it costs a good amount of electric to run some of these pumps and these pump stations, materials and supplies, and the equipment fund rates. This is kind of the real money slide in terms of where the fund is financially. If you look back several years, the sewer fund's fund balance has been declining each year, but on a pretty predictable plane. So it was as high as about 44% at the end of 2018, 35% in 19, 28 and 20, and now it's projected to be about 24 and 21 on our pre-audit level, and about 18.5% next year. So we think that's manageable and that's predictable, and we also feel that at this level we don't see a pressing need to increase the rate at this time. As we look forward, though, as you get into the next few years beyond 2022, there likely will be some pressure on the sanitary sewer rate. I don't think it's unreasonable, given that we've gone over just about 10 years, or 10, maybe this will be the 11th year without a rate increase, that's not going to last forever. We've been supported in this fund by some one-time connection fees, some changes we've made in terms of generating additional revenue from flows we get from other municipalities. But in terms of as costs continue to rise, at some point, given that the sewer rate is really the revenue source, it will have to rise as well. And just call your attention, it's still a little bit of ways away, but the current PWD agreement with the Philly Water expires in 2027, which again sounds pretty far away, but it's going to be here relatively soon. That's a big unknown in terms of future impacts. However, that agreement is renegotiated, and the financial impacts of it will definitely be a significant factor on future sewer rates, as that is, again, about 25 to 30% of the annual expenses. The only other thing I'd add, the Commissioner asked me, when you look at that annual surplus, or excuse me, deficit column for 2022, you see it's about 440,000. That equates to roughly about a 6% increase in the sewer rate. So if you looked at that on an average bill, probably talking about $13 in a year. Where this rate sits at $4.51 is really at the bottom of anything that you would look around the area and find any other municipal rate that bills on a consumption basis. Haverford is very close to us. Marlboro, Radnor, and Newtown, I look back in 2016, they were at $6.60, $5.90, and $6.07. So they've been increasing substantially in recent years. A couple other just points of information. Upper Merion and Tredyffrin are both flat billings. Upper Merion's is $300 a year. Tredyffrin is about $250 a year. So again, where we are at about $245 on average, we feel is a good deal for our residents. Next steps as we go forward, the board tonight approves advertisement of an ordinance. By Township Code, we do have to have a public hearing. That would be on May 18th. Assuming that public hearing results in a rate of $4.51, the bills would go out right around June 1st. They are collected very similar to township taxes in terms of 60-day discount period, 60-day flat period, and penalty periods thereafter. With that, I'll pause and see if you have any questions for me.
Thank you very much, Eric. I'll be looking for questions and comments from members of the committee. I will note that the Sanitary Sewer Fund is holding almost $1.7 million in cash, at least will be projected to do so at year end. And that is almost 20% of our expenditures. and that is projected at the end of this year, the end of 2022. I concur with the staff recommendation that no rate increase is needed, and I did ask our manager, the 3 Delaware County townships that have significantly higher rates, all are serviced by a different different sewage plant. And it's one that's in Delaware County, Delcora, and it's not the Southwest Treatment Center that's in Philadelphia that Lower Merion and very, very few other suburban townships have access to. Other members of the committee with questions or comments? Commissioner McKeon.
Thank you. Eric mentioned that he thought this is a good deal for residents. I'd say I think this is a very good deal for residents. Sanitary sewer fee, I mean, this is an enterprise fund which is self-supporting through user fees. So the fact that there has not been a change, there has not been an increase in that fee since 2012, we've kept it at $4.51 per 1,000 gallons, is fantastic. And then, a couple commissioners have noticed this, but you look at some of the local communities, we are $4.51 per 1,000 gallons. Radnor is $8.89 per 1,000 gallons. Newtown Township's $9.02 per 1,000 gallons. So a lot of neighboring communities are literally double what our rate is. So I think that's great the way that this has been handled for recent years. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McKeon. Other comments from other committee members? Commissioner Kramer.
This reminds me a little bit of some of the discussions we've had about raising taxes. And my question is this: if we are running at a deficit now, and if we have been running at a deficit for 3 years, and we have essentially a structural deficit built into this rate, wouldn't it be more prudent to put in a small increase now instead of continuing to deplete the balance and then having to impose a much larger increase down the road?
I think you're correct, Commissioner Kramer. This is fairly reminiscent of past discussions, and I would again say that something like this, in terms of whether or not the board, if you have a structural deficit, in terms of how you want to approach that, in terms of if you want to do smaller, more regular increases, or wait until the fund balance declines and then do what might be a larger increase, is a policy choice for this board to make. You're not going to see a government finance best practice that says you should never increase a rate over 10% in a year or 2 straight years or anything of that nature. It really is something for this board to deliberate and decide on in terms of how they want to approach it, because I can understand your point, and then I can understand another resident's point who might say, don't take any more of my money for sewers until you absolutely need it. So there's different sides and different perspectives of it, and that's up for the board to deliberate and decide.
Thank you, Eric and Commissioner Kramer. Other committee members with any questions or comments? Seeing none, any members of the public, now that we have more members in the room, any members of the public wish to come forward with questions or comments? Yes, sir, you may come to the podium, preferably this podium over here. Online residents wishing to speak, Jody? Okay. Sir, I just want to make sure that the public comment that we would be entertaining at this moment would be on this agenda item only. If you're here for another agenda item, you will be offered that opportunity at that time. Thank you. Is there someone else, someone online?
I am unable to promote this person. Generally, tell them you're trying to promote them and they accept that. So
Okay.
they've raised their hand.
Maybe they're here for another agenda item this evening?
Could be. And that's it.
Okay. So seeing no public comment, I will move that the Finance Committee recommend to the Board of Commissioners authorization to the Township Secretary to advertise a notice of public hearing and intent to adopt an ordinance enacted pursuant to the Code of the Township of Lower Merion, Chapter 126, Sewers, fixing the amount of the annual sanitary sewer rental fee and establishing the amount of $4.51 as the charge to each property connected to the Township sanitary sewer system for each 1,000 gallons of water consumed, fixing the amount of the annual sanitary sewer rental fee for each property directly connected to the City of Philadelphia sanitary sewer system as that amount charged by the City of Philadelphia for such service. Do I have a second? Commissioner McComb with a second. The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor so indicate by raising your hand. We've had discussion. Are there any opposed? One opposed. Any abstentions? Madam Secretary, that motion passes with one abstention.
Abstention or
Excuse me, my mistake, my bad, with one opposed.
Commissioner Kramer, do you prefer that not be on consent?
No, it can go on consent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kramer. Okay, fifth and final item on tonight's Finance Committee agenda is a presentation. As I mentioned earlier, this is a presentation by our Chief Financial Officer on our financial performance in 2021, as well as a first quarter 2022 update. Eric?
All right, thank you, Commissioner. So, we're going to do tonight is take a look at kind of the first quarter financial update, look back at 2021, and then kind of have a brief look at the current year, what we're seeing, and discuss some various financial items. I'm going to sort of tag team this item with Mr. Blvd, so we'll be passing the baton back and forth, but we'll be as expeditious as possible. So in terms of 2021 financial performance, generally really positive results when you look at the general fund. So what you see here is what was budgeted, what we had estimated in terms of the proposed budget in November of 2021, and then where things are on kind of a pre-audit basis right now. So really positive results. Revenues up about 1.3 million, higher than what was projected. Expenditures lower than what was budgeted by about 40,000, but those actual expenditures less than the estimate by about 300,000. The variance about 1.8% versus the estimate on the revenues, and about 0.5, half of 1% on the expenditures. The bottom line is we end the year in a very strong financial position for the general fund. Definitely provides some financial flexibility for the board depending on its policy choices going forward. So that, I'm going to pass it quickly to Chris. I'll be back.
Thank you, Eric. In looking at our general fund results, again, this is for the full year 2021 pre-audit. We see real estate transfer taxes, business privilege taxes, parking revenue, police services, and grants and reimbursement expenses. And if you add those numbers up, that's about $1.3 million over our estimated actual. That's really, in essence, the fourth quarter of the year. So that's certainly positive news. Our only significant revenue underperformer was building permits. It tailed off in the fourth quarter, but it still was ahead of budget. So if we look at the next slide, we see a detailed version of this. And if we look down at the bottom line, the grand totals, we see about $1.34 million changed from EA. And that can be really made up of mostly the top three items: real estate transfer tax, business and mercantile tax, and parking revenues. When we look at the real estate transfer taxes, we have more sales in the last quarter, higher value sales, higher prices for residential properties and commercial properties, and certainly some high-end commercial transfers that resulted in about $388,000 more than we estimated back in September. For the business and mercantile taxes, towards the end of the year, there are refunds granted from the prepayments. It was less than expected this year, resulting in that $346,000 surplus. And the third item, parking revenues. Certainly a strong fourth quarter, and possibly a lessening effect of the pandemic, and we see more activity in parking. So when we look at the totals, again, we're looking at $1.3 million better in the fourth quarter. And if we look at it compared to the 2021 budget, we're talking about $12.3 million. And again, certainly the 2021 budget was highly influenced by the pandemic results, and we certainly see a recovery in 2021. Next slide. This is comparing our 2021 results to 2020 results. And again, 2020 was a pandemic year. So certainly we see the $62 million of revenue in 2020 jump to $74.7 million in 2021, mainly due, again, to the top three items: business and mercantile taxes, an $8.2 million surplus, strong results from some of our larger taxpayers, some audit settlements and collections, as well as pandemic recovery for some of the businesses in the community. Real estate transfer tax. As we had mentioned on the last slide, more sales, higher values of the properties, along with some high-end commercial transfers, resulted in $2.2 million in real estate transfer taxes above what we did in 2021. And the PMIC refund. We see in 2020 it was about $800,000. In 2021, it's up to $1.7 million. And if we look at that $1.7 million, so the 2021 refund is based on our 2020 claims activity. And again, 2020, the pandemic year, the shutdown of various businesses, people weren't seeing their doctors. As a result, we had very strong claim results, resulting in a significant refund increase of about $900,000. And if we look at the grand totals at the bottom, we see a 20% change from our 2021 actuals compared to our 2021 over the 2020, a 20% increase, $12.4 million. For the expenditures, I'm going to pass it back to Eric.
All right, so on this slide, normally you see a lot more variances, but this year they were a little bit more limited in terms of our projections, maybe a little bit more accurate or maybe just a little bit more lucky. The other compensation that you see here, that's really generally overtime. However, you know, when you look at the detail of the prior slides, you'll see like police services was up. A lot of that is actually reimbursed overtime that we get for police. So overtime as a whole wasn't up all that much over our estimate. It was just the reimbursed overtime. The professional technical services, we did just miss a little bit here on our estimate here. We did have a little bit higher engineering, slightly more in legal expenses than we had estimated. The materials and operating supplies, we just spent a little bit less in terms of some paint and highway, asphalt, and police ammunition. And the employee benefits and salary, just as a group, we continued to really see a decent amount of staff turnover and attrition throughout the final quarter of the year. When your staffing levels go lower, your salaries and associated employee benefits go lower as well. But overall, within 1% of where we had estimated. In terms of when you look at the pandemic year 2020 versus 2021, in terms of the changes, about 2.2%. The contracted services, what that's really generated from is, remember in 2020, we really had very limited programmatic experiences through Parks and Recreation. A lot of that was shut down. We came back with a lot of our traditional programs and people really wanted to go to them. When we pay out to the actual vendors who might provide a basketball program or a soccer shots program or something about that nature, it goes through this general category. So that's really much more just a return to normalcy. The other compensation, again, is what we talked about in terms of those reimbursed overtimes in police, and we did have much higher winter related overtime in 2021, 2020. I don't even think we bought salt in that year, which actually explains the material and operating supplies in terms of why that was a jump. Uniforms and clothing, you see a huge number there. We hadn't bought police uniforms in, I think, over just about 3 years. We had just been doing some periodic replacements, so we were due to invest in that area. The equipment rental increase, those were higher, especially in parks and highway due to some new equipment. And again, when you look at the salaries, that's really those vacancies that we had throughout the year, which kept that a very small level. The rentals, that again goes back to snow. When we will hire a contractor and rent some equipment to do parking lots when we have a decent amount of snow. We did not have that really occur at all in 2020. It did occur in 2021. And then just finally, some of the other categories, machinery and equipment. We had a pretty large purchase in 2020 for some police equipment with a virtual reality training program. We actually had grant reimbursement for it, but again, when that comes in and then goes out, it just causes a large variance. When you look at the sewer and solid waste funds, sewer we just talked about, so I'm not going to say anything on that. Solid waste, we did have a strong year. It really was strong because of the commodities markets, which had been hurting us for a lot of maybe the previous 3 to 4 years, really turned around. I think it's everyone having all those cardboard boxes outside their homes. So that means, especially as material costs and gas prices have risen now, that it's even more expensive to get new paper. So recycled paper is really in demand. I looked just recently, we've been getting $125 a ton. I have rates going back to 2014. That's the highest rate we've ever received. So really that paper revenue and also the commingled expenses coming in much lower than had estimated really helped on the revenue side and the expense side. We ended the year at about a 13% fund balance, so that's really positive for the solid waste fund. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chris just to talk about the year-to-date.
So we ran this information as of about March 23rd, so it's in essence the first quarter of 2022. Real estate taxes, which is about 50% of the general fund's revenue, is on target, tracking historical performance, which is good news but expected news. Again, real estate transfer tax, we keep coming back to that. Properties are still selling, high prices. Again, we've had a real strong first quarter for real estate transfer taxes. Business taxes. Our taxes are due this year on April 18th, which is in about 10 days or so. So we don't have information yet. We'll be processing these returns over the next 2 or so months. So when we do our presentation in the summer for the second quarter, we'll have some information to provide on the business tax results. Other areas, parking revenue, again, looks to be rebounding, more consistent with pre-pandemic times. And we're hoping this year for a normal year with the pools, which certainly should boost recreation fees. Investment income. For the past 2 or 3 years, we've been practically getting nothing for our investments. 0.1, 0.15, really small rates. As we know, interest rates are rising now. It hasn't quite hit the investment side, but we are getting about 1% now. So that's significant over the 0.1%. And my guess is that will continue to go up to some extent. So we should see an increase in investment income. And the last item, PIMIC refunds. We budgeted about $1.1 million for 2022. Again, 22's refund is based on 21 activity. Based on what we've seen so far, we're expecting something more in the range of $1.3 million or about $200,000 higher. On some of the expenditures, salary and benefits, that's certainly the driver. With staffing levels, turnover, and open positions, currently we have about 20 open positions which we're working to fill, but as they're not filled at this moment, we are saving money on staffing levels for benefits and salaries. Winter storm costs, we did not have a bad winter this year. We are a little bit lower than last year, but unfortunately, the snowstorms that we did have this year were most of them were on the weekend, and as a result, weekend equals, overtime, double time, etc. So sort of a bad break there, but again, we're still below what we were last year. So overall, it has been a very good start to the year for the general fund, and I'm going to pass it back to Eric, who's going to talk about some of the financial issues that we're seeing.
All right, so now that Chris gave you all that good news, I'm going to give you the bad news. You look at the equipment fund, the impact of inflation and supply chain matters. We're really seeing that in our equipment fund right now. Just as an example, we buy generally Toro large riding lawnmowers. There's one that we bought in 2017, it's a 16-foot width, so it's large, but you need it to do those parks. $105,000 in 2017. We got our estimate, $156,000 this year. Rebates are being slashed, price increases, parts, gasoline, diesel. I think everyone kind of knows about that. So the scope of this wasn't anything that we saw back in October. So this is going to have an impact on the equipment fund. We'll continue to report back out to the board on this, but we are expecting equipment fund rental rates to increase substantially next year. Definitely will be in double digits. It could be over 20%. 20% just in the general fund is about $470,000. So that is something that is a financial concern going forward. We can also talk as we move forward throughout this year about potential things that the board might want to do in order to help support the equipment fund. In the past, we have done some transfers into that fund. It might be something to consider. Not something we need to deliberate tonight, but just kind of putting things on the board's radar for going forward through the rest of 2022. And then just some final items. Our 2021 audit is ongoing, on schedule. We're hoping to have that wrapped up in June. Our pension valuations, you might remember in November, the board passed updated mortality tables. After that was done, we completed with our township actuary all our documentation to the state for those 1/1/21 valuations. They actually don't have a due date until March of 2022, but all that has been submitted and is completed. We're looking forward, hopefully, to in May we'll get that. We'll see that large direct deposit from the federal government again on the ARP, and we're working to complete our first quarter report through the Treasury Department in terms of ARP plans, allocations, spending, things of that nature. And then finally, in March, we discussed our bond sale. Gave you details on that. We have the actual closing next Tuesday. That's when we actually receive the money. And as of Monday, we had about $733,000 still in our 2020 bond fund, so that's good that we won't end up looking like we're going to have to reimburse any general fund expenses. Just makes things a little bit easier. But also, it's positive that those funds have lasted so long. It makes me more optimistic that this new $15 million will last further into 2023. And with that, I'm happy to pause and answer any questions any board members might have.
Chris and Eric, thank you very much for your presentation and the great deal of good news that you have provided to the committee and the public this evening. Do members of the committee have any questions or comments for Eric or Chris?
Yeah.
Commissioner Bernheim.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Zella. Yeah, gentlemen, thank you for the comprehensive presentation. It's really very well done. It's always nice to hear the good news, but let me question some of the bad news. When you talk about the equipment fund and you use as an example the 16-foot, Toro motor, do we have, or I presume we do, a list of that equipment that we anticipate purchasing within the next year or two, so that when we consider some of the use of ARP funds, that may be something that we put into the hopper for consideration, because that equipment services the entire community when it's acquired. So I don't know if that's something you can put together to give to that committee, so they'll have that on their list of considerations going forward. Because I can assume those costs are going to continue to rise.
I think that would be a correct assumption, at least based on what we know right now. I can report out to you that in speaking with our fleet manager and such, they generally meet and look at equipment needs, probably around June, July, August for the next year for all the departments. They're actually looking out multiple years this year. Right. Also, not just because of cost increases, but because of how long it is taking to get the equipment in. Right. So that is something that we are actively doing at a staff level. And if that's something that the board wanted to consider, it's certainly something that can work its way through that process.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Other committee members with questions or comments? President Sinai.
Thank you, Commissioner Zeloff. And Chris and Eric, thank you for that terrific tag team presentation. You pulled that off somehow in a way that I cannot figure out how you pulled it off, but you did very well. And the content is always just terrific, so thank you very much. I think I have a comment and observation, or a question and observation. I guess the first is, if this is a one-time, or temporary bottleneck in cost, right? So, sorry, increase in cost of equipment just because we have a supply chain issues that are eventually get loosened. And it's not just inflation in general cost, but it's actually bottlenecks leading to the only people buying equipment right now are the people who really need it right now, and therefore they're paying through the nose for it. I guess one is it does seem appropriate to me to cover that with a one-time transfer because it's not a recurring cost that would have to be funded with a rental rate. But the second is I presume that you're looking at what you can defer if you think costs will come down. In a year or two, you might not think that at all. You might think that these higher levels are here to stay. So there's a question, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the overall analysis and things of that nature. And our fleet supervisor, I think, does a really good job at being thorough and looking at that equipment. And when you look at the equipment to be replaced, when I look at things, I'm always also looking at when were they originally supposed to be replaced. And fleet does a very fine job at trying to extend the useful life of things. So that's obviously something we're going to do. When Chris was talking earlier about some of the equipment that's going to auction, one of the things they've been doing, just to kind of give you an example, is they've actually been kind of vulturing all of that equipment to take any parts that they think they might need because they're not able to get parts off. And a lot of that equipment is going to have to end up being towed to auction because it's not really running because they're trying to take everything they can out. So they really are kind of going all hands on deck to look at these issues and things of that nature. I agree with your comment on the, if it is a one-time nature or maybe a one-time transfer makes sense. Overall, though, I don't think anyone is really looking at kind of gas and diesel prices and thinking they're going to drop, $1 or $1.50 and go back to where they were maybe 8 or 9 months ago. And that's one of, the biggest inputs really are the parts, the gas and the diesel, and the future costs that you project that go into those rental rates. All three of those things you're generally expecting are going to go up, which is why I'm thinking that those rental rates are going to go up very substantially, even if we do other kind of financial means to try to support the fund.
Okay, thank you, Eric. That makes a lot of sense. And then the other is, on the good news that you told us about. I'm always a Debbie Downer on this topic. I recognize this, but part of the reason we have good news on the revenue side is that the economy is running kind of hot, and the consequence of that is, and the follow-on from the high interest rates that we're seeing right now is the Fed rapidly raising rates, and the consequence of that is a recession in a year or two. And so that's not a decision for tonight. I think as we go forward looking at these things, it will be helpful, at least for me and perhaps for the rest of the board, that we be thinking about a downside scenario, what a recession 23, 24 looks like, just so we are making sure that we're adequately kind of protecting ourselves against it as we make our budgeting decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's wise, and we can, when we provide those revenue projections, kind of do a baseline optimistic, pessimistic type of scenario. The only other thing I would add is that typically, not always, but typically what you see in the governmental revenue sector is there's generally a lag to the overall national economy. So if the economy were to, say, in July start to contract, you would likely not see that probably until the next March to April to June of the next year in kind of governmental revenues because they tend to lag. Same thing happens when the economy heats up. It tends to lag from a governmental perspective. So that's also just something to keep in mind as we move forward.
Yeah, completely agree. And probably the laggiest thing is going to be our property tax revenues.
Yes.
Right?
And that tends to be the bulwark in terms of, the stabilizing impact that we have.
Exactly. But it's the business tax component and the property transfer and that component has been a large portion of our outperformance.
Yes.
And consequently, after a year late,
yes,
maybe the underperformance. Okay, thank you very much, Eric, as always.
Yes,
thank you, Commissioner Dahl.
Thank you both. Other committee members with questions or comments? looking at the screen. Commissioner Churchill.
Yes, Eric, I don't know if you answered completely the question about our equipment fund. If it should be, if we should infuse it with some money, looking at it as a one-time anomaly, or I seem to indicate that, higher prices are here to stay. So it begs the question, should we, at least for our 2023 budget, look for a significant increase in our equipment fund or not?
Well, I think two things. One is, a one-time transfer serves a purpose to kind of make sure we raise the fund in terms of making sure we have adequate cash on hand for future purchases. The equipment rental rates, Commissioner Churchill, are almost absolutely going to escalate, I think, to a significant degree. It's just a question of how high that percentage is. I don't want to make a kind of a broad statement tonight, because I think we're still probably about 5 to 6 months away from when we'll actually be kind of making final estimates, and a lot can change, as a lot has changed in the last 5 to 6 months. But I said earlier, you could see equipment fund rates rise on the level of something like 20%, which would have a substantial impact on the general fund, the solid waste fund, and the sanitary sewer fund. That is absolutely something that could be something that the township is faced with.
Well, just for clarification, when you say rental rates, the township buys the property, and then the various divisions, they pay rent on this equipment back to us. Is that what you're talking about, the rental rate?
Yes. That rental rate that, like, the Parks and Recreation Department pays kind of to the equipment fund is to pay for their trucks, their mowers, any of their major equipment. So again, that would increase those costs, so that way we can continue to keep that fund solvent, so that way when those major equipment pieces come due, we have the funds on hand to purchase them at what we are anticipating now are going to be probably higher elevated prices.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we have enough money in our fund to cover expenses for this year. It's going forward that it'll be a discussion for another day, but thank you very much.
Thank you both. I will observe that our fund balance at year-end 2021 is 36%. It's actually 3 times our policy minimum of 12%. Our goal is 15 to 18, but our policy minimum is 12. So 3 times the policy minimum fund balance is really remarkable. We heard very good news that the markets for recycled materials have strengthened considerably, and that our solid waste fund is in much better financial position and actually is running almost a $500,000 surplus for 2021. Our equipment fund is generally well funded, but we've heard concerns, and I think that Commissioner Churchill, you have it right, that this is to be discussed later this year, and as Eric said, I suspect next time we discuss it, Eric will provide us with numbers so that we can get a better handle on what makes sense to do going forward. And so with that, I guess before I close, I'll ask if there are any public comments, either from members of the public here in the room or online. Jody? Seeing none in the room and hearing of none online. Eric and Chris, thank you again for your team presentation on our financial performance. And President Sinai, that closes the business of the Finance Committee for this evening.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Zeloff. And with that, we move to the Building and Planning Committee. I recognize its chair, Commissioner Grimes.
Thank you, President Sinai. There are 3 items on the agenda for our proceedings tonight. Some of you will note that there are 4 on the physical agenda. This is to notify people that number 4, the authorization to advertise the ordinance chapter A177 planting materials and specifications is going to be tabled or will be, for tonight, so we will not be discussing that. If anyone's here to discuss various trees and shrubs, please come back at a later time. Items number 1 and 2 on the agenda both deal with 111 Presidential Boulevard, and let me set sort of the stage for how we're going to handle that. This is a little bit of deja vu because this board 3 weeks ago, I believe, already discussed the conditional use application and already voted on the conditional use application to recommend that it not be approved. We are back tonight on that for 2 reasons. One is because we have been advised by council that the motion that was approved may not have been definitive enough in its rationale. And number 2, because the applicant has asked for an opportunity to address the board on some issues and some changes, and I have told them that they're going to have that opportunity. So first, we're going to deal with the conditional use application. We're going to hear if Jillian or anyone on our staff wants to make some brief comments. We're giving the applicant an opportunity to make some comments. Then we will take commissioner comment. I will say now and probably say it again in a few minutes that because there is a very extensive record of commissioner comments from a few weeks ago, commissioners should not be compelled and in fact should be encouraged not to say the same things over again. But having said that, we will take commissioner comment. We will also take public comment on this matter. Then, once we have disposed of the conditional use application, we will deal with the tentative sketch. My goal is for our staff and for the applicant to say things the first time they talk about the tentative sketch as well, although formally there is an opportunity to say things again and for the public to comment again, although we'll ask, I'm hoping people will just take one opportunity. So that in a nutshell is how we're going to handle this. With that, Jillian, please.
Thank you. As Commissioner Grimes has said, this was discussed at the March 9th Building and Planning Committee meeting, so I'm going to give a brief overview of the proposal, the property, and then also report out on some of the changes staff has worked with the applicant on since that meeting. As you said, it's conditional use and tentative sketch plan. And just to orient everybody, this on the screen is the subject property. It's approximately 9 acres, and it was developed in the 1980s as a office park. And I just learned that it was from Terry Foley, the former director of the City Avenue Services District, that it was the Honeywell Foundation, the Honeywell Corporation's headquarters. It was and by them. The applicant is proposing to construct a 5-story mixed-use building with 22,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space, 425 residential dwelling units and upper stories. Oh, sorry. I can speak closer into the microphone.
You can take it out and hold it.
So the applicant is proposing a 5-story mixed-use building containing 22,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space, 425 residential units, and 676 structured parking spaces in a wrapped parking structure. And they're also proposing expansion of streetscape improvements and public gathering space. The applicant, as part of this proposal, is seeking conditional use to exceed the maximum permitted lot width and to deviate from the building configuration standards to not provide a full building step back at 3 stories or 45 feet. Following the building and planning conversation meeting on March 9th, there were a number of great questions and comments made by all of the board. And one of those was whether or not the applicant would be open to including affordable housing in the project. The applicant, following that meeting, met with staff and they are agreeable to adding 5% of the units for moderate income, and also 5% for workforce housing. In the issues briefing that was included in the agenda, there was language that was included, and that language included a 30-year limitation on the inclusionary housing. The applicant has revised that, and they are willing to remove that 30-year limitation. So that is the language that you're seeing before you, and the change to the 30-year limitation is shown in red line. So those are those two new conditions. One is for 5% of moderate income, and one is for 5% of workforce housing. There was, the applicant had previously submitted a request for relief of the natural features code to disturb slopes. Both staff and the township solicitor discussed this. The slopes were determined to be man-made by the township engineer. And pursuant to the decision of the Court of Common Pleas of Montgomery County with Lower Merion School District versus Lower Merion Township, that relief is not necessary. So the applicant has withdrawn that relief. However, the applicant has also agreed to a condition to address some of the concerns that were discussed last month about impact to slopes. And that new condition includes a requirement for restoration and erosion control plan to be submitted with the preliminary plan to address concerns for the sloped area. A concern was stated last month about a location of short-term delivery, so staff has included a condition also to address short-term deliveries. And there was also a comment made at the meeting last month that some of the conditions, there was a desire for some of the conditions to be strengthened. So there are two conditions that are before you here that require, that we feel the applicant is amenable to, and we feel strengthen the requirement. And additionally, with the conditional use conditions, the applicant has also agreed to adjusted language that would require action rather than require the applicant to just investigate or explore. And that is the list of changes. And I believe now we're going to hand it over to the applicant.
While you're getting set up, sir, if you don't mind just identifying yourself and others who are going to be making part of your presentation.
Absolutely. My name is Adam Harbin. I'm with the Hanover Company. I was participating virtually at the hearing on March 9th. I've been at Hanover for 17 years. This gentleman beside me is Jake Denny. He has been at Hanover for several years now. And we have a team of consultants here alongside us, including Denise, our entitlements counsel, who I'm sure a lot of you know, Chris with Bowler, our civil engineer, Elise with Design Collective, our architect, and Chris Williams on traffic. All right, ready to go? Okay, great. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to represent our case for your consideration on the conditional use matters at hand. As I mentioned, my name is Adam Harbin. I work with the Hanover Company. Hanover is a 40-year-old, vertically integrated, award-winning, best-in-class developer around the country. We've done many projects in the Philadelphia region, and we're absolutely excited to be here again tonight. I will keep my presentation very brief. I want to echo some of the things that Commissioner Grimes outlined, and also Jillian from the planning staff outlined, to correct some of the things that were discussed at the previous hearing that I believe were inaccurate, and also to highlight some of the things that we have done since that time to make our project better and more compelling. First of all, the new and improved conditions. As Jillian outlined, we have agreed proactively in response to some of the commissioner dialogue at the previous hearing to offer affordable housing. It doesn't have a sunset provision. We heard some concern that 30 years was too short, and so we've removed that. As long as the property is used for apartments, there will be a 10% affordable housing requirement, 5% of it at moderate, 5% of it at workforce, We have offered as well to monitor that and to submit annual audits and certifications so that that burden doesn't fall on the county. That equates to 42 units. That 42-unit stock of housing is a 30% increase over the existing township stock of affordable housing. We're doing that not to get additional density or height or anything. We're doing it because we think it's the right thing to do. We think it sets a great standard in the township. We also have agreed, even though the waiver for the steep slopes is not required per legal standard and because they're man-made, we have agreed to address those issues through a reforestation plan and to remove the invasive species and to do a tree audit, a tree survey, and an erosion and sediment control plan. Also, as you'll note from the existing conditions that Jillian showed in her presentation, our existing footprint keeps the existing footprint of the disturbed site already. We're not going into that slope more than's already there. And we've done a geotechnical study and an environmental study to suggest that those slopes will be protected during our construction. We also have agreed to a condition regarding off-site delivery. We have a fantastic rear drive aisle for delivery trucks to queue. It was done intentionally. We are, as our own property management firm, we are acutely aware that you have to solve deliveries every day. Fortunately, once you get a driver, whether it's Prime or UPS or FedEx or USPS or you name it, it's the same driver every day. We outline those procedures. We meet with the delivery companies. We set up a plan. And our residents are the ones who are going to be most acutely affected if we don't adhere to that plan and manage it properly. So it was an excellent suggestion. We've agreed to a robust condition to that effect. We also have strengthened several conditions that Jillian outlined that were consider. They're now shall. They're not exhortative. They're required. And we think those were good changes. We've also made commitments to improve the public space in response to staff comments and to sustainability, agreeing to achieve certification and agreeing to a 40 electric vehicle car charging standard with an obligation to provide conduit for additional expansion of those 40 spaces. And a number of those spaces will be located in the retail section and the office section as well, so that members of the public, visitors to the project, will have access to some of those. I also want to talk about a misconception. This was the second point, and then I will conclude my presentation. There was a statement made at the last hearing that we should not be given a conditional use on the two minor modifications that we're seeking, because it would allow us to build a bigger project, because it would allow us to build more. That is the opposite of what would happen. Conditional use in this instance doesn't allow us to build a bigger project. It allows us to build a better project. To be absolutely clear, the step back variation we are providing, we're not suggesting that we don't provide it. Quite the contrary, we're providing it above the first floor, not above the third floor or above the 45-foot level. We are foregoing the square footage that we would otherwise be entitled to. That's equal to 18,000 square feet. That's equal to about 25 units. Without a conditional use, the by right version of this plan is bigger. It has more units. It's taller. It's longer because it doesn't have the private entry drive in the middle of the street. That gets slid down to the end of the street. It's closer to the street because we have to make room for fire access at the rear that we're not providing through the middle. So instead of a smaller project because the conditional use is denied, the project that instead results is taller, bigger, longer, closer, with more units, and without the same package of robust conditions and community amenities that we've discussed here. Why didn't we just pursue that project? Because we've worked for 18 months with planning staff and with numerous public meetings to design the project that we think the RCA CAD district wants. The spirit of the law, the mixed-use plan that we have provided with meaningful placemaking, retail and commercial space, and yes, apartments, are exactly what the code contemplates, and it's exactly what we believe planning staff has helped us design. It's not a bigger project, it's a better project. The final thing I'll mention is, if for whatever reason we went away, what is there now would not remain what is there now. Our landowner has recently been acquired and is now owned by a large Wall Street-based private management firm. And they have telegraphed to us that if our project isn't successful, and if we aren't successful with the version that we've presented with the conditional use, which is we think is the better project, there is that by right project that we discussed. But if for whatever reason that doesn't work, this project will be released. It's empty now for 2 reasons: the ongoing pandemic, and because our seller, the landlord, has been aggressively detenanting the building in anticipation of this transaction. If this transaction were not to be contemplated, that building would be released. And I've heard comments about how, well, you can't get the same tenants there. You can get tenants there. It's a function of price. This owner would realize redevelopment isn't a possibility. We're going to fill it up. That would, according to our submitted traffic study, produce more traffic, more peak hour trips in both the morning and the afternoon than our project at full stabilization when factoring in all of the other planned projects. That's the legal standard for traffic studies. That's the one we've submitted. And the fact of the matter is that even at stabilization, our traffic is less than what would happen here in the peak hours if it were stabilized. Our seller has telegraphed to us they plan to aggressively stabilize this building if for some reason this transaction isn't possible. That was another, I think, point of confusion at the last hearing, and I appreciate the opportunity to clear up. Again, though, let me conclude by saying that your action tonight in granting the conditional use, should you so decide, doesn't allow us to build a bigger project. It's a better project. It's the one we've worked on with your staff. It's the one that your conditional use hearing officer agreed in a very clear and concise opinion. It's the one that your township engineer agreed didn't need the waiver. It's the one that we believe the Planning Commission rightly approved unanimously. We're incredibly excited about this project. We're a company with 40 years of history and over $15 billion of development. We want to be here. We want to build a project that this township can be proud of, that benefits the community, whether it's the meaningful retail space or the half-acre park or the trail connections. And so thank you very much for your reconsideration of our proposal, and we're happy to ask any questions that may arise. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks very much. So what I think we'll do now is if anyone, any commissioners have any questions for the applicant, for the sake, I will say for the sake of moving things along, I am prepared to make a motion, which I will do, but I thought the best thing is to give people an opportunity to ask the applicant or staff questions at this point. Does any commissioners have any questions?
I do.
Oh, who was first over there? Commissioner
I don't know who
Bernheim.
was first, but.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, no.
Commissioner Bernheim.
Age before beauty.
I'm speechless on that.
Challenge about hair color.
All right. Let me ask, I thought I saw Joe here, our township engineer. Did I see him hiding back there? Uh-huh. Okay. John, you and I have had some conversation. You were kind enough, and first of all, both of you gentlemen were, along with Denise, were kind enough to make a presentation to me, and I appreciate that and everything that you have done and have stated. I'll reserve some comments. I don't think I'm going to say anything that will surprise either one of you, but I want to make sure that before I do that, that I have something factually accurate. In connection with conditional use, one of the requirements is that the traffic differential need not go down from a C to a lower level D, and that I noted that the traffic engineer, in response to questions, I'm just going to read one of them, which talks about section 155-11.1.1G4, which provides the traffic generated by the proposed use when combined with the current use shall not result in a level of service lower than C, or if the level of service is already C or below, shall not alter such level of service for adjacent streets and or the nearest intersection thereof. Short-term English, can't go C or below. All right. Here's the response from the traffic engineer of the applicant. The proposed redevelopment generates less traffic than the existing office land use, and therefore the proposed redevelopment results in either improved level of service or levels of service that are no worse than with the existing office land use with respect to the traffic conditions for the surrounding road systems. Doesn't answer the question. I take issue with what it states anyway, but leave that aside. It doesn't answer the question looking for a letter. Therefore, I asked for the actual traffic study reports, and then I had to get a follow-up because behind them are exhibits. Thus comes when I went to our township engineer, because I can't decipher these things, but what I can read is where it shows current existing on one level says B, and then the new traffic study says D. And Joe, you and I discussed that. Can you please explain so that I don't misinterpret what this report is where it shows the level of D, where that is and what it's depicting? Can you do that?
I don't know if I can do that from memory, but I do.
I'd be glad to give you these. I should have had the blown up ones. I apologize. But I just don't want to make a misrepresentation.
This is for the intersection of Presidential Boulevard and Glen Road that is showing one of the turning movements that degrades from a level of service B to D.
Okay, all right. So then I'm correct that that area shows it goes from a B to a D, so that when I make my comment, I'm at least accurate when I make that statement, all right? And then I believe you also had asked for some type of follow-up, if I'm not mistaken, that you would explain to me?
Well, what was submitted with the conditional use application was a site access evaluation. We would expect that a traffic impact study or a transportation impact assessment be submitted with the preliminary plan as well.
Okay.
We did have some questions on the highway capacity numbers that were used in the study, and we would like them clarified.
Okay, now, with that, did you get answers to those questions?
No.
Okay, and can you educate us what it is that you were looking for so we'll understand and maybe we can get those answers?
We were looking for the credits that were taken for internalization and for pass-by traffic.
Okay.
For the traffic generated by the proposed development.
Okay, and that would help determine whether those levels B, C, or D, correct?
It does play a role in the calculation, yes.
Okay. All right. Hopefully that information will be forthcoming to you. All right, Joe, thank you very much, and I apologize if I put you on the spot. Yes, you did.
Just real quick in response to that particular condition, which is a condition of conditional use approval. That particular section, as you stated, Commissioner Bernheim, is talking about it needs to be level of service C, or it can't be any worse than what it currently is. And the language talks about adjacent streets and intersections thereof, which it's unclear whether that's actually talking about actual driveway access or it's talking about actual intersections that are along the street. But be that as it may, the existing condition there is currently with the office a D in one of the movements, but not in the entire intersection level of service. The entire level of intersection service is actually a level of service A in all of the on-site intersections. It's just one movement, which is a left turn out, which is on-site, which is a level of service D. But that's equivalent to what it currently is with the office, which is the opposite peak.
Right.
And the other comment, I just want to make one more comment. It's the level of service, that one turning movement that is the level of service D, but not the full intersection, is just slightly a level of service D. And if, I just wanted to make this comment, part of the analysis included as part of the retail a breakfast restaurant. And if we took the breakfast restaurant out, it would be a level of service C anyway. So one, I think that language means something different than what you're suggesting. And I also just want to have the traffic consultant, because I think what he said is something was incorrectly stated, so we just want to make sure we have the right facts.
Chris Williams with McMahon Associates, and I won't take a lot of time, but the traffic report that was presented only presents the traffic results or the level of service results for the future condition with the apartments and the commercial use. So there is no comparison in what you're looking at. This is only showing levels of service in the future condition. So what you're referring to as a B and a D, those are not the same movement. They're not intended to be compared to one another. The level of service B is the level of service for the left turn movement from Presidential, turning left into the project, and the level of service D in the morning is the driveway exiting the project. So it's a level of service D on our driveway, not on Presidential Boulevard. And those are two very different movements, not intended to be compared to one another.
And I'm sure, Commissioner Grimes, you're not looking for a back and forth here, but if I can be indulged just 1.5 sentences, and I respect that. It's still creating the problem on the roadway because you're coming out onto Presidential. And the other thing is that when you're talking about the office at peak, what that translates to is as if that office were fully leased up. That hasn't been for about a decade, and not just because somebody's withdrawing tenants. That's because of, the spaces and attracting, offices. And the comment that, oh, well, if you have it, the current owner will try to get, people of, lesser dollar value to come in there. There is no such animal. Those who rent office spaces do it because they need the space and they're going to pay the going price. So I think we need to focus on what currently is from present thing to what you anticipate, is going to be there. So when we look at this, that's why I asked the question. So before I make comments, I didn't misrepresent anything. So I appreciate your clarity. Yeah. And Commissioner Grimes, thank you.
Thank you. There were some others down this way. Commissioner O'Neill.
Oh, thank you very much, Commissioner Grimes. This has to do with the new condition number C for slopes dealing with the mitigation and erosion plan, and I appreciate that it's made this version, and that's terrific. I was curious from staff, this is not stated as an agreement, and does the condition of approval supersede any other preservation agreement that we would then inspect every other year as we do with our natural preserves? I just want just some clarification that we can plan an erosion and mitigation plan and a reforestation plan, but if we don't kind of respectfully monitor over the next 20 years, we're going to end up with, a lot of what we see today throughout the township.
That's a really great question. So going forward, there are individual township requirements for the management of noxious weeds and some of the invasives. They would have to be met independently of this. The applicant is superseding that and coming back and saying their landscape plan will incorporate all of that. They recognize that they're working on a disturbed area, so they're proactively addressing that. With this, I would anticipate a preliminary plan that there would be a maintenance covenant that ran with the property, that much like an open space preservation area, that would also require regular monitoring of the area for compliance with that.
Okay, great. So I'll bring it up in preliminary plan. Thank you. And thanks for adding it again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Vice President Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions just so I understand this better. In the inclusionary housing, there's talk about comparing the median household income for Montgomery County as published, blah, blah, blah. What is that median household income for a one-person household, a two-person, three, four?
So in Montgomery County, the published data says it's around $96,000 for their MHI, which is a family of four.
For four. And would these units be for, units that accommodate a family of four? Are they units for one person?
There are three bedroom units in the building. There are also studios, 1s and 2s, and it is common practice to adjust that for the unit size, so you're not assuming a family of four is living in a studio.
Right.
Those are details we need to work out with staff and with the township and county if appropriate, as we go down the line.
So do you have, for your expectation of the 42 units that would be called inclusionary housing, would those be studios? Would they be 3 bedrooms? Would it be a mix, or do you not know yet?
We don't know yet. Typically, they're dispersed proportionally.
Okay. The second question, just on average, how big are I know, again, there's a mix of units. How big is a median unit? Are you talking 1,500 square feet?
No, the average unit size here is closer to about 925 square feet.
Okay.
And yes, the inclusionary housing units would be dispersed throughout the project in proportionality to the overall unit mix.
Okay, great, thank you. 2 other questions. I think these might be for, one, before I move on to staff. It also talks about the rent, not including utilities and mandatory fees. I know what utilities are. I don't know what mandatory fees are.
That's correct. And we tried to model this condition because we know this is a somewhat of a novel concept in the township. So what we tried to do was draft language pulling from other jurisdictions where, whether it's Montgomery County and suburban DC or Atlanta or Los Angeles, and it is standard for, use the county AMI, and then that AMI is translated into the rent, and the rent is exclusive of mandatory fees and utilities. Everyone's mandatory fees are different. Our mandatory fees include things like a modest application fee, a security deposit, a pet fee if you have a pet, parking if you need a separate space. Charging for parking and unbundling parking from rent is a very smart concept because it discourages the use of cars. And it encourages people to actually think about, oh, I've got 3 cars now. So that's a fee that someone would pay. And that's about it. Occasionally in certain markets you have amenity fees that everyone pays, so you pay $400 a year or something, and that gets you the ability to use the amenities without a cost from that point forward, but it allows the property to maintain those amenities as appropriate.
Would you expect amenity fees on this property? Or is it too early to tell?
I think I don't have that off the top of my head.
Okay.
We would not do it if it were not commonplace in the market.
Okay.
If it is commonplace in the market, we will do it, and I don't have that fact in my head at the moment.
That's fair. Thank you. A couple of questions for staff. The revised condition number 25, and I appreciate moving from consider to incorporate and from may to shall, or whatever it may be. Number 25, it says, applicant shall incorporate pedestrian scaling or pedestrian scale lighting. And then the second sentence, the applicant shall consider the use of dark sky friendly fixtures. What does that mean?
That was actually a recommendation that came from the Environmental Advisory Council.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask Chris to elaborate on what a dark sky fixture is.
After just presenting the lighting ordinance to the Planning Commission this week, I know that one. Essentially what we're trying to do with the dark side provisions is ensure that there's no uplighting. So lights are always facing down, directed down, and fully shielded. So that's the purpose of it.
Why is it shall consider instead of like everywhere else where it says shall incorporate? Is the applicant willing to say shall incorporate dark sky friendly fixtures?
Would love to keep that one the same. I mean, we do believe in uplighting certain things like trees, and the light is captured by the canopy of the tree, so it's still in the spirit of what the dark sky is, but it allows that pedestrian experience as you walk, for instance, through the motor court to see the small trees being uplit. Not knowing the full extent of the ordinance, I would love the opportunity to study it and discuss it. It's something that we share a commitment to, but the reason we use that language was not because we don't want to do it, it's because we would love to understand what's anticipated a little better.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Chris, before you sit down, condition number 8 talks about shall incorporate improvements, including but not limited to landscaping or a low wall that could be incorporated into the public gathering space design adjacent to the streetscape to create a sense of separation from the roadway. I'm a little unclear as to what this ultimately means, because it's saying it shall incorporate improvements, but it could be a low wall, it could be something. So what is this condition trying to say?
I could speak to that.
Okay.
One of the concerns that we had was the public gathering space proximity to a roadway with fast-moving vehicles and creating a comfortable space for people to gather in. And so what we were looking for is some kind of physical separation. It may be a unique landscaping treatment. We've seen low walls, kind of knee walls or sitting walls that have been effective in creating a sense of separation.
Okay, but it's not necessarily a wall. It could be a row of hedges. It could be something else.
I think we wanted to give the applicant the opportunity, or design consultants the opportunity to figure out what would work best with that space as long as it was being addressed.
Okay, thank you.
We have, as part of our vertical integration, we have our own landscape architecture group. They've sat in on the calls regarding the space, and we agree with that comment. And the reason it's left open is we want to allow the flexibility for the design to mature, but whether it's a wall or a hedge or whatever, it's an idea we support. So rather than try to predict that design now, we want to demonstrate our commitment to it, but allow it to mature naturally as we head to preliminary plan. We fully anticipate it'll be a point of discussion.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Okay. Other commissioner questions or comments at this time? Commissioner Kramer?
I have a question for staff.
Questions, I'm sorry. Please, go ahead.
I have a question for staff. Since the board has utilized a conditional use officer, has the board ever rejected the recommendation of a conditional use officer?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of a specific example, but I do know that there have been conditional use denials.
Yes, the board has denied some conditional uses in the past.
Okay. Commissioner Kramer, anything else?
No, that was my only question.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioner questions at this time? Okay, seeing none, thank you. I am going to make a motion, and we'll see if there's a second, and then we will proceed with comments and then public comment. So let me just remind people first that this is a motion on the conditional use application. It is not a motion on the tentative sketch plan, which we'll deal with later. And whatever this committee chooses to do with the conditional use does not necessarily reflect on what comes next with tentative sketch. So having said that, I'm going to make a somewhat lengthy motion, and then I'll add some explanation, assuming there's a second. I am going to move to recommend denial of the conditional use application for 111 Presidential Boulevard for the application's failure to demonstrate that the development with the two conditional use approval requests would comply with the following provisions of the City Avenue District Regional Center Area. Section 155-6.6A 1A of the Code, which lists as a goal or objective of the City Avenue District to, quote, enable the development of a mix of commercial, institutional, and residential uses. Number two, section 155-6.6A1C of the Code, which lists as a goal or objective of the district to, quote, discourage the dependence on automobile use by promoting multimodal transportation, improving connections and links to public transit, and creating safe and inviting pedestrian access ways, thereby reducing traffic congestion, unquote. Number three, section 155.6.6A1E of the Code, which lists as a goal or objective of the district to, quote, enhance the visual character and identity of the district through the building mass, scale, and design, landscaping, and signage, all appropriate to the goals and objectives of the City Avenue, the CADRCA zoning, unquote. Number four, section 155.6.6A1F of the Code, which lists as a goal or objective of the district to, quote, ensure that the architectural proportions and design of new buildings create a pedestrian-friendly environment, especially at the street level, unquote. And finally, section 155-6.6A1J of the Code, which lists as a goal or objective of the district to, quote, protect the character and quality of existing residential neighborhoods proximate to the City Avenue District Regional Center Area. Is there a second? Thank you, Vice President Gavin. So,
excuse me, Commissioner. I'd like the opportunity to respond to that because we didn't have the opportunity during the question.
do what?
To respond to each of those items
well,
since we didn't have the opportunity.
we've already had the applicant's opportunity.
I agree, but we didn't know that those were going to be points that were going to be raised.
I hear your request. I'll take it under advisement. Okay, you're not going to do it right now, okay? Thank you. So we have a second. So let me just say, I have comments on each of these, of which I am probably not going to do all of them right now. From my view, this application, by nature of where this property is located and the function of this property, fails to demonstrate that it will further the goals and objectives of the City Avenue District, and in some sense, it is very difficult for this application to do that. For instance, One of the goals, as I said, 1C, is to discourage the dependence on automobile use by promoting multimodal transportation, improving connections and links to public transit, creating safe and inviting pedestrian access ways. Well, this property is not near public transit. This property you basically have to drive to unless you're somewhat of an athlete. And by where it is, again, because of where public transit is, really probably could not easily comply in and of itself. In terms of the first one, Section A of the code, which lists as a goal or objective of the district to enable the development of a mix of commercial, institutional, and residential uses, I would note that this building is yet another, although this application stands on its own, that is not promoting a development of a mix of uses and is a continuation of the one-sided development of residential use. The current building that is there is designed to be more than 50% office use. This proposal increases the residential component of the building from 0 to, I believe, 425 units. It dramatically reduces the office space, and it maintains limited commercial space, which again is the contrary to the goal of the district of reducing the mix of use, and in fact does little to promote a mix of uses either in this property or elsewhere in the district. So I had other comments, but in the interest of time, I'm going to, I suspect other commissioners will have comments on this motion, so I'm going to give them an opportunity if anyone would like to comment. Are there, Commissioner McComb, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. With all due respect, I couldn't disagree more strongly with your analysis of what is being proposed and what is good for the City Avenue Special Services District. I'm a board member, as is President Sinai. We're very familiar with what is desired by the City Avenue Special Services District and what is good for that district. Going point by point, this sort of enables pedestrian activity as best as possible for that location. There's connectivity, there are trails, there's transit available. It's not a far walk down to City Avenue where there's regular bus service. It's walkable to the Cynwyd line, which is now functioning. It's a visually attractive building, and it doesn't detract in any way from the residential areas nearby. It's a good project, and I'm not going to go into all the reasons I supported the project at the March 9th hearing. But again, if you're taking that sort of approach, nothing will go in there. That building will become vacant, stay vacant forever. It's a good project, and I think your motion should be defeated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other commissioner questions? Commissioner Kramer, please.
Is this for comment?
Yes.
Yes. Our conditional use officer very carefully evaluated the evidence and concluded that the conditional uses were appropriate because they further the objectives and goals of the City Avenue District. I haven't seen any reason or any evidence on which we can base a rejection of her findings. And it is important for us to follow the law and not substitute our own desires for the kind of or amount of development in this area for what is in our existing code and on which our community business partners rely. I think that this is a good proposal for this location. It's one that comports with the goals and objectives of the City Avenue District, and we should support it and defeat this motion.
Thank you. Other Commissioner Bernhardt, please.
I would like to propose what I hope we will find.
You can talk to me anytime by saying hi.
We'll take public comment in a few minutes. Go ahead, Commissioner Bernhardt.
Fair enough. I'd like to propose what I hope you'll find is a friendly amendment to your motion, and that would be to add that the denial of the conditional use be because of a failure to comply with section 155-11.1 G4A, which provides that the traffic generated by the proposed use when combined with the current use shall not result in a level of service lower than C, or if the level of service is already C or below, shall not alter such level of service for adjacent streets and/or nearest intersections thereof. I had asked the questions earlier of our township engineer to make sure that my understanding of the actual traffic study received, notwithstanding their request for additional information that apparently was not yet provided, indicated that the street, being Presidential Boulevard, will then have a level D from the traffic that is there, and it is registered from the current use, not fictional use, as if that building were leased up, because it is not. And I would ask that you would add that as a basis for denial of the conditional use. And then if I just may add to some things, or let me just do that. Go ahead.
Interject. I will take it as a friendly amendment, provided you give me the citation again.
Certainly. It's 155-11.1 G4A. G4A.
Perfect. Thank you, and you may continue your comment.
Well, I think that procedurally, if that's out there, you take it as friendly amendment, then I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Zaloff? I'm sorry, Commissioner Churchill, what are you asking?
Just a point of order, the seconder has to approve this as a friendly amendment.
I approve it.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Zaloff, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. Last time we discussed these two items of relief that are proposed via conditional use. I did agree with the first one, which has to do with not installing a minor street, but rather installing a entry driveway. Made sense then, it makes sense today. The second issue was the elimination, even though it's partial, it's still a elimination of the step back, which would be in the third or fourth story, because it didn't make sense to me at the time as to how that would be not lead to a larger proposal, a larger building. But I have now come to understand the benefit of the second category of relief, because what's been proposed is not the maximum that the zoning code would allow. And we heard that quantified tonight with, I believe, 25 less units than the zoning code would permit if it were, quote, maxed out, unquote. The relief for the step back actually does improve the design and presentation of the building at the street. And further, as noted in the opinion, what's called an enhanced setback, not step back, setback at grade at the street is actually deeper than required by the code. That is rare for a developer to propose greater setback. The relief makes sense to me, and I will support it. And Commissioner Grimes, I have further comments when we get to tentative sketch. I have tried to restrict my comments to only the relief proposed in the conditional use.
Well, I've asked others to make their comments now if they're able to, so I'm going to leave it to you. If you think they would be inappropriate to make now, then don't. But, I mean, I will give you another opportunity, but I have asked
I don't want to
do
be,
that.
Okay, you're opening the door to the whole, including tentative sketch comments. That's fine.
Well, that's what I've suggested to others.
I somehow missed that. This is a large site. The And what's proposed here is large, but in addition to the reasons that the relief makes sense, we have significant improvements over what was proposed last month, including conditions that now require, rather than ask for a developer to consider. We do have now, without being required by the code, both affordable and workforce housing incorporated into the proposal. We have a proposal that is supported by the ward commissioner, something that historically we consider as a factor. And as I said a moment ago, what's proposed is not built to the maximum permitted by the zoning code. I also want to add new information that we didn't have last month, but finally a study from the Lower Merion School District with regard to public school students coming from multifamily development in the township. A study that, in my view, does pass the smell test. A study that says, historically, based on the 4 years of 2016 to 2019, where a number of multifamily developments were actually built and occupied in the township, the number of students was 8% of the number of units. In this development, that translates to 35. That's it. This large development, based on historical data, recent historical data, would only generate 35 students into both public and independent schools. So something less than 35 would probably go to our public school system. It is often cited as a reason to not support multifamily housing. And so I now support this, which is different than my views a month ago. Thank you.
Thank you. President Sinai.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, I'm just sort of going down.
No, I figured you were just going down the line at this point. Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. I actually, I do just want to start by going through this conditional use issues, and so I just want to ask Gil, ask our solicitor a question.
He's there.
Are you okay? So you're just okay. You can hear me. Okay. So just want to be clear. So when I look at our zoning code, and the issue is the denial of conditional use based off of the planning objectives that are kind of in the preamble to this section. If I look in our code, I guess it's 155.66C under conditional use. It says blah blah blah. The board can grant conditional use if the applicant demonstrates to the satisfaction of the board that such variations are in furtherance of 155.66A goals and objectives. And Commissioner Grimes cited several of those goals and objectives that he contends that this does not satisfy. I just want to confirm with you that we are reading this code correctly, that it is this board's judgment of whether the goals and objectives in 155.66A 1 is what determines whether we get to grant, we should be willing to grant conditional use or not, if I phrase that clearly.
Well, I think you have to look at what the conditional use request is for. The conditional use objectives relate to the request itself. The request here is not to permit a mixed-use building on this site. The request here is to allow a driveway instead of a roadway, and it's to allow a broken facade, if you will, rather than a continuous facade. So the question is not whether the use itself is desirable. The question is whether the facade, as broken, furthers the objectives that are there, or whether the driveway, rather than a road, furthers the objectives that are there. So the use itself is a permitted use, and the conditions for the grant of a conditional use therefore have to be relegated to the two specific conditional use requests that are being made.
I see. Okay, so that's very helpful. Then further to help my understanding, so one of the elements that Commissioner Grimes cites is 15566A1E, which is enhance the visual character and identity of the district through building mass, scale, and design, landscaping, and signage, all appropriate to the goals and objectives of the CAD RCA zoning. And so to your point about the facade, like is what follows from that we basically assess this as a board when we evaluate conditional use?
I mean, I think that's a great example of what general condition, if you will, would specifically relate to the conditional use that was being requested.
Okay. Okay. So that was a yes. Okay. The second question, sorry, Gil, thank you very much. My next question is not for you, it's for Joe. Joe, are you here? Yeah, there you are. And I just want to follow up. So most of the grounds for denial fell in that 15566A category, but Commissioner Bernheim brought up 15511G4A, which is a general traffic test for conditional use. And I just want to understand, because I didn't follow the back and forth of what intersections were a D. I think the applicant said it's a D if you're coming out of their driveway and not on any public street, but I may have misunderstood that. Can you help me? And if you cannot, I'm going to need to ask them. I'm trying to spare that. Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a self-correction as well.
Okay.
So it is a individual turning movement that is at level of service D, and it's for the site access. And it's for which turning movement, Chris?
Exiting the driveway in the morning.
Exiting the driveway in the morning.
Okay, so if you can help me with what a D means, because I usually think of that as how long. I'll let him do it, but thank you very much. If I usually think of it as exiting, as how long you wait at like a light.
It's exactly what it means.
So that means it's a people on the property are waiting.
Yes, it's a measure of delay for that for the people that are waiting to make that turning movement
out of the property. So anyone coming into the property from the public street, they do not have a D.
That's correct.
Okay. Got it. Okay, so that clarifies things. So those are my questions, and so I will, if I may make some comments. I'll try not to repeat myself from previous meetings too much. I've said this before. I feel like what we are learning as a board as we go through this, what our zoning delivers and whether it's delivering what we thought it should deliver, or what we think it should deliver under our current current environment. And I'm with people who leaving aside whether this whether conditional use should be accepted or denied. Just outside of that, big picture, I'm not necessarily completely comfortable with what we're getting out of our zoning code here. In part, one of the things that we've raised a lot, which is a healthy mix of uses in what's supposed to be a mixed-use area. Personally, I wish this, the commercial element in this property had more commercial and less residential. I wish the area had more commercial and less residential, and I wish this were a microcosm of that. I kind of wish that our zoning code required a more proportional mix of residential and commercial in any given development. And if that wasn't economic in the current situation, then the parcel would just wait there until it was, and we would kind of keep our powder dry for a better opportunity to do development. But on the other hand, I do think one thing that we should do is provide a degree of certainty for applicants and property owners in our community by having our code, but doing what our code says. And this is tricky because I think reasonable people can have different interpretations here on these conditional use items. My interpretation of this project is that it furthers the goals of the district, even though I wish it were a different project. I suspect a number of my colleagues are going to have a different assessment of it, and I respect that, and I think that is also a reasonable conclusion to draw. But I'm going to be in favor of this, even though I feel like it's too big. I feel like if we impose these conditional use conditions, we would have a road in the middle of this property, and we would have effectively two buildings on it that collectively would be just as big. I kind of feel like if we split this parcel in half and we got two applicants of 225 units each, they would kind of have to be approved, and that's what we would get, right? I think this is a function of what our code is giving us, rather than our correct application of the code. So I'm going to support it. I do think it is a high quality version of what it is. I'm grateful for that. I think that's, we kind of are where we are from my perspective. And I think the applicant and staff have clearly explained why the conditional use is A, justified under our code, and B, helps there be a better city avenue, even though, or a regional center area. I will stop there. Thank you, Commissioner Grimes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Vice President Gabbard.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. I don't like this project at all, but that's irrelevant. As Commissioner Kramer said, we shouldn't substitute our own opinions. We should follow the law. So, we heard it's a good project. We heard it's a good proposal. We just heard from me, it's a bad project. We heard from Commissioner Sinai, it's a project he wishes wasn't this project. None of that matters. And it's absolutely right. It doesn't matter. We have to follow the law. And the law says for conditional use, to grant conditional use, it should further the goals and objectives of the district. We heard that from our solicitor. We've heard that multiple times. And I'm not going to go through everything that Commissioner Grimes said, but we just heard about from President Sinai about the size and the scale of this project. There is explicitly in the code for this district, one of the goals is to enhance the visual character and identity of the district through building mass, scale, and design. I mean, it is black and white. That's what the law said. This does not do that. We talked about it back in March. We talked about it earlier. President Sinai said that. This is a giant building. This building, by not meeting the code and not doing what our code says and asking for conditional use approval, because of its scale, because of its size, because of its mass, because of the lack of pulling back on the third floor, because of not meeting the driveway versus the road in the middle of it, all of that plays into the fact that the architectural proportions and design of this building and the scale and the size and the design of this building do not further the objectives of this district, and that is exactly what we're deciding on for conditional use. There's a lot of other things, and I will hold a lot of my comments for tentative sketch. I think the affordable housing part, I'll talk about that later. I'll talk about the mix, and actually, I think that's another. I'll talk about that now, because I believe also for conditional use, one of the goals is to enable the development of a mix of commercial, institutional, and residential uses. As we heard from our solicitor, it's not the project as a whole, it's what's happening here. And as Commissioner Zeloff pointed out, this doesn't max out the project. Maxing out the size is not in our code anywhere. It doesn't matter whether it maxes it out or whether it doesn't max it out. But by meeting the code, there is an opportunity to reduce that residential piece. If you do have that step back on the third floor, yes, there is a step back potentially on the first floor as well, but there's no reason there couldn't be another step back on the third floor to reduce the scope, to reduce the residential mix. I mean, right now, this is for every 20 square feet of residential, there's 1 square foot of commercial and 0 square feet of office space. Put it another way, of the space in this building that's not parking, 95% of it is residential, 5% of it is commercial. And that plays into the way this was designed, and this was designed in a way that does not meet what our code says, and that's why they're asking for conditional use. To me, it's very clear that this project does not further these goals. Because it doesn't further these goals, I don't think it's appropriate for this board to grant conditional use. A project could have been brought that met these goals. A project could have been brought that did not ask for conditional use, but that's not what was brought here. And we heard from the applicant themselves that if this project's not approved, this building will go back to being an office building, and that was a threat to us. Okay, I mean, the goals, again, of this district are to promote a mix of commercial, institutional, and residential uses. I don't see how going back to office space here is a bad thing. I don't see how that doesn't further the goals when we've had so much residential. That does help the mix. So what we're seeing here is something that doesn't further the goals, and therefore conditional use should not be granted. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we finish down here, is there any commissioners online who would like to make a comment? You're free to raise your hand if you would. Okay, I see none. So anyone down at Commissioner McKeon, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. I think that for this conditional use analysis, section 155-6A1A is, in my opinion at least, the most important factor, and that's the whether or not this furthers the goals of the CAD. And the first one is the proposed modifications will enable the development of a mix of commercial, institutional, and residential uses. We heard our solicitor a few moments ago say that this should be very specific, and you look to see whether these deviations further the goals. Our conditional use officer did not perform that assessment. If the conditional use opinion is 32 pages long. It's only in paragraph 52. It's 2 sentences. It states, the proposed modifications will enable the development of a mix of commercial, institutional, residential purposes. And then the conditional use officer concludes, the proposed development is a mixed-use family, multifamily, residential, and commercial building. Basically a holistic analysis saying that 155-66A seeks a mix, and because this is a mixed-use project, this must be okay. So that's completely different in terms of legal analysis than what I heard previously, and I respectfully disagree with our conditional use officer's conclusion, because if she had gone back in 2018, we amended the CAD, the City Avenue District, and one of the reasons we did this, the primary reason, was there was too much residential and not enough commercial, and the idea was to tip the balance back the other way. If I need to put stuff on the record, in November 9th, 2018, we had a staff briefing memo, which noted that the residential plan submitted to date had exceeded the anticipated balance between residential, retail, and commercial developments. So the CAD was then amended December 2018 to limit the development potential for future multifamily projects. What we have here is 4 stories of commercial that have now been flipped into 4 stories of residential and 1 story of commercial. So I submit that this does not further the goals of the CAD as amended in 2018 when we take this holistic approach, which our conditional use officers seem to use. So for that reason, and I'm not speaking about the tentative sketch, but I believe the conditional use can be found to be not legally compliant because it does not further this first goal of a mix, meaning balance.
Okay, thank you. Are there other commissioners who wish to comment at this time? Okay, just for clarification, in case anyone wants to prepare on the board, although I said, and I specifically said to Commissioner Zeloff that everyone should make their comments at once because I realize that some people may not have done that, I will give an opportunity at tentative sketch if anyone wants to make some brief comments. And Commissioner Zeloff, if you want to repeat everything you said, it was so profound, you're welcome to do that. So
that would
at a
be,
later time.
That would be highly unusual for you to offer that, Commissioner.
Well, I'm
Williams.
going to
So I may take you up on that on some other application, but not tonight.
Got it. Okay. So let me just make, because I'm just going to make 1 or 2 more comments from what because I offered the motion before. I want to emphasize that my motion is based on the criteria for the conditional use. As others have brought that, I brought it out and others have brought it out subsequent to me. The tentative sketch matter is a different matter. I agree with others that the specific conditional use conditions for entitlement to conditional use, for the reasons I said, have not been met. So I just want to be clear on that, that there is as will become more apparent when we get to tentative sketch, now that I've given myself and everyone else a chance to comment again if they need to. I am basing this the motion I made, whether it is granted or fails, based solely on the criteria for conditional use. Before we go to public comment, Ms. Yarnoff, I will give you a brief opportunity to make some comments if you would like.
Thanks very much. I'll be very brief. As your solicitor mentioned, the conditional use is for the two modifications, the two minor modifications to the building and the site. And therefore, the conditional use criteria deal with those modifications, not the building itself. So many of the comments that have been made are talking about the building doesn't meet the criteria of the overall.
You can pick up that microphone and that'll help a lot.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
better. Thank you.
So what I was saying is that, as the solicitor mentioned, the conditional uses have to do with the modifications that are being requested. And so when the board is considering the requirements deal with the modifications and not with the use of an apartment building that, by the way, does have retail and does have office and is therefore a mixed-use building. And so even if it did apply to the building, it would meet that criteria. But again, this board is supposed to be analyzing in terms of the modifications and whether the modification of actually creating more articulation in the building rather than less articulation in the building with the step back where we are showing it actually furthers the design criteria. And I think someone mentioned that the specific, I think it was Mr. High, had mentioned that the particular criteria of the building mass scale design is the one that actually makes the most sense for this particular request, because it actually has to do with what the building looks like. And as you heard from Adam earlier, the building has more articulation, more design, more depth, is more beautifully designed than if we were to actually design this building in accordance with actual ordinance without the conditional uses. In terms of just going very quickly through those, the first one we already talked about. The second one, which talks about having more public pedestrian multimodal transportation, this project couldn't be designed to have more pedestrian activity associated with it. So I don't understand at all how that particular provision would not have been met. Again, we're talking about the modifications and not the overall site, and I know sometimes it gets confusing. But again, if we're looking at the modifications, adding that interior driveway roadway is creating more pedestrian activity and offers than without having that. The third item that was mentioned has to do with the building. We talked about that. The third has to do also with the architectural portions. We've talked about that and how we clearly meet each of those. And the last has to do with the character of existing residential neighborhoods, which, again, there's existing other apartment multifamily buildings, which this would meet the character of that. There aren't direct residential neighborhoods associated with this project. So I don't even know if that's even applicable. So in any event, we believe we meet every single one of these as it relates to the modifications, and even if you expand it to the building, we still would meet each of those. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay. We will now take public comment. If there are members of the public who wish to speak, we ask that you go over to that podium over there, which has a microphone. If you would start by stating your name and the neighborhood that you live in. As is custom at the committee level, we don't have a formal time limit, but we ask you to max it about 3 minutes. So, sir, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you hold it up close to you if you would.
My name is Mitchell Kaye, K-A-Y-E. I live at 190 Presidential Boulevard, almost directly opposite this project. As Commissioner Bernheim said, he doesn't need an expert in jury selection because he knows the potential jury pool. Well, I know the neighborhood and I know the traffic. In fact, my unit faces presidential. I'll limit my comments to the City Avenue District qualifications, and I'll put it in plain English without all the numbers, the way I understand it to be from attending other meetings. The specific purpose is to minimize pedestrian and vehicular conflicts. That doesn't mean cars hitting pedestrians. It means vehicles moving, the way I interpret it. It means the way the vehicles can enter and exit. And I heard the letter D, and D someone said meant delay. Well, to me, it also means danger of exiting an area, because the longer you wait, the more impatient you get, and the more difficult it may become for a safe exit. And also an entry if you have to make left-hand turns. Now, I remember a number of years ago, presidential was 4 lanes. Well, there were all these traffic studies because of the increased traffic that we're going to make it 3 lanes, 1 in each direction, and a turning lane and a bicycle. That was done, at least to my understanding, because of the traffic congestion. With the proposed project, I believe adding 18 parking spots along Presidential on a cutout will create more of a traffic problem. You'll have people trying to parallel park, and we all know how difficult it is. Most places now, it's pull in directly. Also, there was concern about deliveries. I know when I'm on Presidential, right now, these UPS guys, Federal Express, they're double parking. Now, you think a Federal Express or UPS or any of these delivery companies are going to pull into a driveway, worry about getting out again, when they can just double park, run in with packages? Logic and common sense apply. And just in quick summary, this project doesn't promote any safe flow of traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Before we get to the next person, let me just say what I said at the start. We would ask if you have comments to make on either conditional use or tentative sketch that you do that for both now. We will, because the rules require a separate public comment for tentative sketch, but we're asking if you have comments, just do it once. So is there anyone else? As I said at the beginning of this section of this agenda item, there is a conditional use application, which is what we're hearing right now, and followed immediately afterwards by a tentative sketch application for the same project. It's 2 different votes that this committee is going to make. We're asking people in public comment, if you have something you want to say about this project, please come up now and do it. I'm saying that technically I have to allow for a second public comment period during the tentative sketch hearing, but we're asking that you only come up once, and I had forgotten before Mr. Kay got up to say that. Yes. What's that? Thank you. I can't be that succinct.
My name is Carol Aaron. I live at 190, Presidential Boulevard across the street. Clearly, in looking at the maps, small as they were, the parallel parking spaces directly across from our driveway are directly across from our driveway. The concern is that when a person pulls into this parallel parking area and they see that there's a spot vacant or somebody's coming out of the spot, they're going to stop here and wait for that person to get out of the spot. and their tail end is going to be on Presidential Boulevard. And it's going to it's not going to hold up the traffic. Somebody's going to ram right into them the way they travel on one Presidential Boulevard. And it'll just obstruct the traffic flow in the area. This can cause the person in the driving lane to use the center lane, which is what happens all the time now. So can you imagine what's going to happen when this building is there? The other day, I was coming home, and I was trying to make a left-hand turn out of the building towards Monument Road. Somebody was coming from City Line on the other side. They pulled into what is the office building now, and somebody quickly pulled behind them into the center as I was going into the center. Well, that's a crash ready to happen. And it's going to happen over and over again when people are trying to get into that center lane. So I ask you to think about that before you do anything with the parallel parking.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Larry Spielvogel. I live at 190 Presidential Boulevard. Yesterday, I went over and looked at the existing building at 111 Presidential Boulevard. Every one of the dozens of main beams supporting the entire expanse of this building were recently reinforced with heavy steel plates, all of which are near the existing steep slope. Yet the township proposes to waive their mandatory steep slope requirements in return for, quote, a mitigation and erosion plan for the restoration of the woodland, end quote. I do not know the full extent of this issue, but the potential public safety consequences of your approving this project are unknown. Some casual observations. There are apartments in the basement of this building, contrary to customary practice. There are more than 50 apartments with their only outdoor exposure directly opposite and within 100 feet of the Schuylkill Expressway, with traffic noise 24/7. What developer or designer would have the conscience to have this many people living this close to this noise all the time? And it would not likely comply with the township's noise ordinance. Some other apartments in this building are within a few hundred feet of an often used and often very noisy heliport. There are some days with multiple loud helicopter landings and takeoffs at all hours of the day and night. This noise is probably also not covered by the noise ordinance. The other problem here is when you look at some of the new apartments in Lower Merion, they are adjacent to large office buildings. And so nights and weekends, the overflow parking from those apartments can use the office building parking spaces. Go look behind 3 Bala Plaza, or look at the Luxor. Where are the residents, visitors, and customers going to park when there are no more parking spaces available in this building? That the applicant shall pursue and use good faith efforts towards sustainability is already mostly mandated by the Pennsylvania Uniform Construction Code, as adopted and enforced by the township. The proposed public gathering space is immediately next to a township sewer pump station within 20 feet of an open sewer gas vent, possibly making it unsuitable for its intended purpose. If the public open space also will be used for dog walk, since it is right next to the building's dog washroom, it may also not be suitable for its intended purpose. This is due to the pet odors and droppings. There are also no public restroom facilities or water fountains shown in the public space, also making it unsuitable. Therefore, for all these reasons, you should vote against both the conditional use application and the sketch plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spielvogel. Is there anyone else with public comment? Okay, are there anyone online?
We have Aaron Gross online.
Okay, Ms. Gross or Mr. Gross? If you could just identify yourself and make your comments, please.
Hi, my name is Aaron Gross. I live at 10 Montgomery Avenue in Bala, Cynwyd, and I also serve as the president of the neighborhood club. I'm not representing I'm not representing the neighborhood club as I appear right now, because we have not made a resolution for this meeting specifically, although we have sent a resolution in the past, which I'll get to at the end of my comments. But my first comments that I'm going to make, I think I'm going to echo somewhat President Sinai, in that whether or not we like this building, it's what the code calls for. And I want to bring that up, not because I necessarily agree or disagree with approving this building, but I want to say that, you know, in 2018 and 2020, both when the City Avenue District Code was changed and when the new zoning code was changed, there was a specific non-action taken, or there was action taken specific to City Avenue District. And those are policy decisions. And it's important that the commissioners remember that choosing to act or choosing to not act is a policy decision. And therefore we must, you know, there's a responsibility for whatever goes in. And, you know, we see in this specific instance, as we're hoping from the master plan that was put out in 2016 and the zoning code that followed that zoning code does matter. The zoning code does matter in terms of what we get, in terms of how our neighborhood looks. And like President Sinai said, in terms of, you know, when exactly within the market, at different times, different market forces will allow for different construction. Now, bringing that up, I want to say also that what makes me less fearful of this specific project, but you know, looking at this as a whole at all of City Avenue, is that there are a lot of projects going up, and there are a lot of proposed projects that aren't being put into force yet, or you know, development rights that exist but haven't been they haven't made any headway in their applications. And I believe that market forces will determine some of that. So if initially residential does go in, and then, you know, there's a greater need for office space, the Tishman Spires project or the Federal Realty project are waiting to pounce on that, and they will take that initiative. But it's up to the commission, it's up to the board to make sure that if we want that the conditions of the zoning code, you know, are primed towards that in that instant, in that, you know, in that situation going forward. You know, it's funny, you know, it was mentioned that there's, you know, institutional and commercial and residential, and at least for City Avenue, but possibly for everywhere now, retail may be the new institutional in terms of, you know, what institutional represents and what retail represents. And now that's as a service to the community, as service to the neighborhood, because retail is not surviving in the same way it was in the past. Big box retail, as we know from the Lord and Taylor site, as we know from many other sites, doesn't exist and anymore. And so we need to sort of figure out how that's going to be planned for and going ahead in the future. The height of the step back, also the step back in the zoning code is something that I want to bring up, because I like to point this out often, in that it's quite an arbitrary height, you know, and it's not, you can't, the zoning code calls for a specific, if a building is higher than a certain amount, the step back has to go up after a certain amount. And of course that's arbitrary, because it all depends on what the building looks like and how far away it is from the road, and, you know, the sight lines and the shade and the you know, the sunlight, and how that will affect the people, the pedestrians. But I think it's something that we need to focus on, not as a barrier to development, because if it just became a barrier, then it could just be used as a barrier to anything, to any type of project, but rather as a point of negotiation. And there is a little bit of leeway within what the solicitor stated, and that, and as it relates to the goals of the township, and that is to ensure that this project as a whole works for everybody. Now, representing the neighborhood club, I want to just echo, because we did pass a resolution to these. Yes.
If you could begin to sum up your comments, please.
Yeah, I'm about to finish up. I apologize.
Thank you.
The neighborhood club did pass a resolution asking the township to work with the developer on the pedestrian parking, on the parking situation out front, possibly giving them a waiver for the parallel parking that's required under the new code. And a couple of the commissioners brought this up at the previous meeting, and I don't know if it was brought up tonight because I wasn't here for the whole meeting, but essentially, I know some of the residents did. There's the new age it involves Uber and DoorDash and Amazon, and I think it behooves the township to create some sort of requirement, or at least to work with the developer in this case, because it isn't a requirement yet, to allow not just for parking spaces, but perhaps if instead of 18 spaces, parallel parking spaces, you ask for 12, and the space where 6 other parking spaces would go would be where drivers who are only stopping and going could park, because that would significantly ameliorate the possibility of cars double parking. So just wanted to bring that to the attention of the board again, and thank you for letting me make my comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other public comment? No. Okay. Okay, ma'am, please.
My name is Beth Ann Kessler, and my background, I have a degree in architecture from the University of Michigan, and I'm late to the game with all this, and I was just listening to a few things, and I'm not commenting on these provisions that you're talking about. I'm just commenting on the big picture. When I heard someone mention that the average size of the unit is 925 square feet, all of you live on the main line, and I know most of the people in the building at the Corinthian where I live are older than the people with the project. They've worked their whole life to have a beautiful home on the main line, and most of these units are 2,700 square feet. There's some 5,000 square feet. They're large, beautiful condominium units. And right across the street from the Corinthian will be affordable housing, as somebody said, because it's the right thing to do. Well, those 925 square foot units, they might be 500 square foot units. I don't know if anybody realizes that 425 units with 5 stories high, that's very, very dense. It's a lot of people. I know of one building in Center City, it's 25 stories high, and it has 250 units, and it's very dense and a lot of people. This is going to totally change the Bala Cynwyd area. It's a lot of people in what these people work their whole lives to have a luxury, beautiful condominium. So whether it's a residential or commercial, just this whole project was squishing in 425 units, and 425 units might mean double that. There could be 2 people in each unit. It's like almost 1,000 people. I don't know if anybody understands how massive it's going to be. So talking about traffic with A's and B's and D's, it's common sense. There's going to be a lot of traffic. And I even know with the Corinthian, when people come in to park, there's ample, everybody has 2 spots or whatever they get, but there's still extra spots. There's visitors. It's going to be a huge problem. And I don't know where all the commissioners live, but for the people that live at 191 or the Corinthian or the Fairmont, those buildings, it's going to be a disaster. That's all I really have to say. I know and I would be interested in seeing the plans. I haven't seen them, but from the few things I heard, and I'm sure these people worked very, very hard and whatever they're proposing, I'm sure they wanted to do the best they could do. But for the area, if this goes forward, it's very sad for everybody that worked their whole lives to be on the main line. So that's it. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Okay, is there any other public comment? I see none. No one else online, right?
Correct.
Okay. Let me note that we did receive a written comment, but the person who submitted the written comment has testified in person, so I'm not going to mention that separately. Before we go back for a vote, on the conditional use motion, are there any commissioners who have anything else to add at this time?
Can you give a response to public comment?
Yes, you could, yes.
Ever so briefly, if I may?
Commissioner Bernhardt.
Try not to be redundant, repetitious, or say the same thing
Please.
more than once. So to those who've come forth here and talked about traffic, which is the focal point I had 3 weeks ago and again this evening, and I did make a comment that you don't need an expert if you drive it every day, as I do. My mother used to live at 191, so I've heard from many of the 191 residents who still think I am their outlet for township problems regarding this. And I recognize that what is going to go on there, from having now looked at the traffic studies themselves, and, you know, notwithstanding some disagreement that I may have with some of those experts in the manner in which they do things, this will increase traffic tremendously. Putting 425 units into that area is also going to create density, which many of my colleagues have already indicated is inconsistent with what we were trying to design with the code, and I think what is stated with the code. And where I may disagree respectfully with President Sinai is that when you're talking about a level D, and that is a delay of getting out of that area, it's a delay because of the number of cars that are there. The reason that there are a large number of cars is because there are a large number of units that are there. I would submit that in the reports that are done, they have underestimated, as somebody just pointed out here, the number of automobiles that you're going to have from 425 units, which are, I believe it is 70% proposed to be one-bedroom units. Every single one of those will have a car. There is no public transportation there. The concept of parking on the street there, the only people who will do that are those who do not value their lives. Getting in and out of an automobile there would be absolutely moronic. The only thing more moronic would be the bike lane that we put in there. If you note, it's about 100 yards up from City Avenue, and then it dead ends at 191. What do? Pick your bike up and walk and pray? It is the silliest thing I've ever seen. I laugh every day when I drive by it. But the concept here that the traffic, that the density which we have tried to prevent through our code is going to create is why I state the conditional use ought to, as the motion is on the floor, be rejected. And my hope of hopes is that listening to this, the fine gentlemen who I've listened to before they were here this evening, would get the message, dial this thing back. Dial it back significantly, and you will find that we will then support something which would be consistent with what Lower Merion deserves and wants. And unfortunately, this project, notwithstanding all of the fine accolades that goes to Hanover, this square peg does not belong in this round hole. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Vice President Gatlin.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. Commissioner Bernheim just said dial it back and we'll get what Lower Merion wants and deserves. More than that, if you dial it back, we'll get what Lower Merion's code allows. This is not allowed by the code. There are two items here, which is why we're in here for conditional use. One, to exceed the maximum permitted lot width required by the zoning code, and two is to deviate from the building configuration standards required by the zoning code. Ms. Yarnoff said these are two minor modifications. These are not minor modifications. Talking about the maximum permitted lot width, there is an explicit goal of this district of ensuring that the lot, the mass scale and design, talking about the mass scale and design of buildings, and here we're being asked to exceed the maximum permitted lot width. I don't see any way how that furthers the goal of matching the mass scale and design of an appropriate building. Second, we spent years coming up with a new form-based zoning code. The whole purpose of this code was it's form-based. Now we're asked to deviate from the building configuration standards. Yes, it may have more depth, it may have more design than the initial design without that, But just having more of it doesn't mean it's good. I heard a lot tonight about it's more, we have improvements from last time, it's better, there's more. If my daughters came home and got a 68 on their math test, and the next test they got a 72, they could say it's better. It's still not good. I still wouldn't be proud of them. But just because it's more doesn't mean it's good. So there are ways to design this building to meet the zoning code, to not ask for conditional use, and have even more depth and even more design, and to be something that not only is something that Lower Merion wants and something that Lower Merion deserves, but something that meets Lower Merion's zoning code. And this is not it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I see no one else, so I will call the vote. As a reminder, the motion on the table is to deny the conditional use application. So, all those in favor of the motion to deny, raise your hands, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. I see 5.
No, check on the screen.
Oh, I see 6. Thank you. Opposed? Opposed, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the motion fails. Is there a new motion? President Sinai.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. I will move, I need to find this, sorry, that we approve the conditional use as, recommend to the Board of Commissioners the approval of the conditional use application pursuant to zoning code sections 155.66C and 66E1 to exceed the maximum permitted lot width required by zoning code section 155.66B3, deviate from building configuration standards required by zoning code section 155.66D1F to not provide a building step back. And for explanation to just the people in the audience, that's because the zoning code specifically allows these deviations if conditions in the zoning code are met.
Thank you. Before I ask for a second point of clarity, do you intend to include the conditional use conditions that the staff amendments that were presented?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Grimes, including the staff amendments that were distributed.
Thank you, which were number 3 and number 5.
Yes.
Is there a second to that motion? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Are there any commissioners who feel compelled to say anything further on this before we take a vote? Seeing none, I will call the vote on President Sinai's motion. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I see 8. All those opposed, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see 6. The motion carries. Thank you. I guess not. It's 6. Right. All right. Now, we will now move on to the tentative sketch plan, which is on page 50 of your agendas. I don't know that there is anything, is there anything staff needs to add before we discuss that? I'm seeing no, so thank you. There is nothing to add. Are there any commissioners who did not feel that they had an opportunity to discuss the tentative sketch issues before? Commissioner Zeloff, because I'm anxious to hear your thoughts, I will allow you to go first.
I don't fit into the category of not having the opportunity previously.
That's right.
Nevertheless, thank you for recognizing me. 2 comments. We heard from the public. We spoke a month ago about the short-term deliveries. We all understand that it's now a permanent part of traffic in the township, and that a pull-off plan to accommodate short-term deliveries is essential, and we have a new condition that addresses it. But I want to make clear that that plan that we see in preliminary plan, and by the way, for members of the public, this is a 2-step public process, so there's going to be another public process called preliminary plan months or many months from now, whatever the developer can satisfy the conditions imposed in this tentative sketch. The short-term delivery design has to be so good that when residents park there and then the FedEx truck stops to block traffic, that has to be a one-time occurrence, right? It can't happen again. So I don't know what the solution is, but it has to be an airtight solution for all delivery trucks, whether they have the same driver or not, have to be pulling off and not blocking traffic. If it means no cars can park in the pull-off area, then maybe that's the solution. But that's going to be essential. Then I also want to say that what's going to be essential in my mind is that the commercial, and even though it's only 5%, it's still a prominent feature of the at-grade mixed-use component of this building. The stores and restaurants, they can't stay empty because we have a new development that's got first floor commercial that's empty. So I'd like to see a condition in preliminary plan, not tonight, that addresses that. And if it requires a subsidy from the developer to enable retail and restaurant to be occupying the space essentially all the time, understanding that things change, but that it's not consistently vacant, that's going to be a very important feature of ensuring that it is indeed mixed use and that, that retail and restaurant is occupying the first floor. Those are my two comments, Commissioner Grimes, not seeking conditions in tentative sketch, but I will be looking for that in preliminary plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner McKeon, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. I just wanted to verify the legality of this with Chris Lesswing. So, Chris, with this plan, the waiver was recently withdrawn, right? The waiver request for the natural features code?
Correct.
Is there, and Gil could possibly verify this as well, is there any legal basis that you're aware of to deny this tentative sketch?
No.
Okay. And Gil, you'd agree with that? What's it?
What do you say?
I said I confirm.
Okay. Thank you. All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Other, Commissioner McComb, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. I'll be brief. I would just, I think the applicant has done everything the township has asked. They have taken the concerns that were raised by the commissioners. Commissioner Courtney raised issues with the language in the proposal. That was tightened up. Some of the commissioners raised issues about affordable moderate housing. They addressed it. In fact, they addressed it in a significant way. 5% moderate, 5% workforce with audited results, so it's not some illusory promise. And that actually is a big increase in terms of the affordable housing in the township, which is something that has been talked about by the board since I've been a member, and there has not been as much progress as many of us would have wanted. So I think this is commendable on the part of the applicant. It's good for the township, and I think it sort of sets a new standard for development going forward, something we might want to look at. So I think we should support it. It's a good project, and I think I'm not going to reiterate all the other comments that have been made by the other commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stevenson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As everyone knows how I feel about development in this township, and I think that I don't have to go over that again. And I won't go over Mr. Zeloff's comments about schools either, and the numbers. Oh, that's probably for the best. I'll take it off. All right. So I will say that I think that there's a lot of issues with development, and I think that as a township we need to continue to look at them. But in the case of this project, the affordable housing piece was a standard I think that is different in this developer. Because they were proactive, and I met with them and talked to them about it. Of course, I asked them for much more, but this is a doable piece, and I do think it is a standard. And I think any developer who comes before us, we should set those same standards. I mean, create the same models for that they have to. I think that it needs to be a discussion about even more when we look at the eligibility of it. And while there are people who have the NIMBY mentality, I push back on that to say that if we truly want a Lower Marion community, then we have to be willing to be encompassing of all that are willing to be a part of it. And I think this is a good step. Again, I challenge my colleagues to work with me to make this a standard. If this is the way we're going with development, which seems that we are, then let's make this a part of the standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioners, any of the commissioners who are with us online? I see, Vice President Gabbard.
Thank you very much. I just want to make a quick comment on the affordable housing. While I agree it's laudable to talk about affordable housing and to add it in, just want to kind of put some facts on what affordable housing is. We heard the median household income that's being used is $96,000 per year. This condition says the monthly rent shall be no more than 30% plus fees plus utilities. So that means for 5% of it, which is at 120% of the median household income, that means this is affordable housing for those making $115,000 a year or less, which puts their monthly rent for the apartment at $2,880, almost $3,000 a month, plus parking, plus amenities, plus utilities. I don't know that that's really considered affordable housing. The better affordable housing, which is only 80% of the median household income, puts the rent at almost $2,500 a month, plus parking, plus utilities, plus amenities, plus a security deposit, plus pet fees, plus an application fee. Again, even the better one, that's only 5%, is still very iffy if you consider that affordable housing. Again, it's laudable that we're even considering it, and I think it's wonderful that that's becoming part of the discussion. But frankly, this isn't affordable housing. This is, this inclusionary housing condition isn't really what it says it is, and I don't put much stock in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to make just a few comments. First of all, just to comment on what Vice President Gavrin just said. Vice President Gavrin's exactly right. This does not do a lot to further the goals that this board has discussed about affordable housing, inclusionary housing, however you want to call it. However, I think that we should recognize it is more than this applicant has to do. And it is a step, and it is a step that other developers, including other developers in the immediate proximity of this project, have not been willing to do. So I think that we should recognize that, and that it was not something that this applicant was going to do initially, and they offered a compromise in response to direct comments that some commissioners made a month ago on this project. They also made other concessions or more commitments on points that they were going to explore, or whatever the word was on the tentative sketch language before, that they are now using, I forget the specific words, but more words of commitment to do those things because they were important to the township, and I would like to recognize that as well. I would also like to recognize that the applicant, Mr. Harbin and Ms. Yarnoff, were generous with their time with addressing members of the board and their questions, not just tonight, but separately. And again, that doesn't always happen, so I personally appreciate that. Of course, since lawyers are glass half full and glass half empty, there's a little bit of a glass half empty part of this discussion. But let me say first, I do not put, blame isn't the right word. It is not the responsibility of this applicant. Some of the things I'm going to mention, I'm going to encourage the applicant to do some more things, but the fact that the township does not require these things, it presently is certainly not the result of anything this applicant has done. I think that the comments that Commissioner Zeloff made about the retail space are right on target. Other developments in the area are suffering from the lack of use of the retail space. I wish we had a way to enforce that. I hope this applicant will do things so that that is not going to be an issue, however that is. I heard Some brief discussion about parking. It has become a issue with some other developments in Lower Merion where the owners are charging for parking, and that has caused the residents of these apartment buildings to park elsewhere in the neighborhoods and elsewhere. That is not an issue, obviously, with this development today, but I would hope that the applicant will, as they proceed, will give more consideration to ways. Hopefully, I would hope parking would be included, but if it's not, another way to incentivize both residents and visitors to park in the complex and not further burden accompanying neighborhood streets, because that becomes an issue. And of course, one of the goals of conditional use in the City Avenue District is to not impinge but to benefit on the surrounding neighborhood, and that's one way that could happen. Also, I will look forward to, as we go to the next stage, and assuming this motion, that there's a motion to approve, that we that the applicant find ways and work with staff to make the pedestrian connections effective, as they've already discussed, and that the public space works. I think that Mr. Spielvogel brought up some issues, and I hope that they will be explored, so there's no issue about whether the public space will be used. So that all being said, as others have said, this project is, I believe, has the right to be approved by right. I will now support this project because of that. I do believe that there is a larger issue with our zoning laws, that we, as President Sinai said, we are not getting what we intended to get. I think the concerns of those who have spoken tonight and other neighbors who have spoken on other City Avenue projects have credibility that we are getting much more density and much more residential density than we anticipated. I think that the market forces in the township and everywhere have changed dramatically in the short time since we passed our zoning laws, so that there is commercial use attractiveness is much diminished. And I would suggest that we should explore ways in which we can address that, because I don't think that we're getting what we intended, the mix on City Avenue. So that being said, again, I will support this tonight, and I thank the applicant for their flexibility, willing to work with us, and assuming this passes tonight, hope that they will continue doing that. So do we have a motion on the table? Oh, I'm sorry, President Sinai, you made the motion, didn't you? Oh, no, you made the motion before. We do not have a motion on the table, so I will just go ahead and move to recommend to the Board of Commissioners approval of the tentative sketch plan for 111 Presidential Boulevard with the revised conditions suggested by staff and distributed before the meeting. Those are revised conditions to number 2, number 8, number 25, and the new inclusionary housing condition, and the new condition on slopes and short-term delivery. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Is there anything further from the board, Vice President?
I'd like to propose an amendment. I'm guessing it's not going to be a friendly one, which would be getting rid of new COA B about inclusionary housing, talking about the 120%, and putting that all into the 80%. I still think it's not fully inclusionary housing, but I think it's better. So new COA A inclusionary housing would be 10% of the multifamily, et cetera. Everything else stays the same, and getting rid of new COA B entirely.
Okay, so
I'll second that.
Thank you. Can I ask if the applicant has any response to that?
We do have a response, yes.
Please.
Yes, hi, this is Adam Harvin again. Thank you for the time. We would respectfully ask to keep the affordable housing conditions as they currently are written, as discussed with various of the commissioners who had expressed an interest in that for several reasons. Number one, this is something that we're doing without any incentive. It is something that we decided to do very late in the game after our land contract had been negotiated, after we have committed to do a number of other items that are significantly expensive, including the trail network, including the half-acre park, and a number of other items. And the one other thing I will point out is the numbers that were quoted earlier about 2,800 and 2,600. Those are aggregated, weighted average rents. They have not been scaled down for unit sizes. And so to say that someone would pay $2,800 in affordable rent, quote unquote, is not entirely accurate. Even the 120% range and tranche of those affordable units will be split proportionally into our unit mix, into smaller studios. So that rent level will be a lot worse, and a lot lower, worse meaning for us, because we're agreeing to forever and ever restrict our ability to charge market rate rents on those units and setting a standard for the township to enforce. We also think it's a good stepping point, something that is not, we've heard the community tonight express concern over affordable housing. I can assure you this is a very high-end luxury product. There is concern about overburdening it with an affordability component. We thought that this balance struck a nice compromise between taking that first step in a way that we can afford to do, while also being able to afford to do all the other things that are important to this board and the township. Things like subsidizing retail if it's not successful, providing free parking to retail visitors and guests, and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have a motion that's made and seconded. Any commissioners that wish to make any comments on this? I see none. We didn't do public comment on this.
You still have a motion on the table that needs to be voted since it's not a friendly amendment.
Oh, it's not friend, thank you. It's
Anytime.
almost like you've done this before.
I'm just
Okay,
guessing.
so we have the motion on the table. We'll now vote on the motion. All those in favor of Commissioner Gavrett's motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I see 6.
You get the 2 on the board?
I did. All those opposed? 2, 5, 6, 7. I see 8 opposed, so the motion fails. Okay. Any other commissioner comments at this time? Please, Commissioner
Yeah,
McKee.
I just have to comment on kind of what I see sort of the absurdity of this with the affordable housing discussion. I mean, we're just in practical terms, these numbers are higher than the mortgage that I pay each month. And when I hear that this is affordable and it's scaring people, or it's going to, I think you got to be under $2,000 a month, maybe substantially under that, to be truly affordable housing. So it's just bizarre to me right now, the figures that we see. And after hearing it on and on, I just had to say something about it. So.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Stevenson.
But I think we need to, and I'm not going to belabor this about I think we need to make sure that we recalibrate how we define affordability in the township and how we defined it here compared to other places. I think the conversation, if we want to talk about affordable housing, the scale they use is the same kind of scale that's not dissimilar to the one that we use in other places. And so I think if this is an issue and a concern that we have, and I'll go back to what I said originally, then we need to set a standard about what we say if someone is coming forward about putting forth affordability, and what we use the HUD scale, which would compromise that and would set that standard and challenge those pieces. So while I appreciate everyone coming forth saying that it's not affordable across the board, and I totally agree about that, I think that it requires us to then, as the commissioners, look at what we want to put forth as a standard in all type of housing that comes forth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Is there any public comment on this matter? And if you spoke before, you certainly should feel no compulsion to do it again. No, ma'am, if you want to speak, you have to come up. Ma'am, you have to stand up, please.
You need to approach the podium and make public comment.
It's Carol Epstein, and I live at the Corinthian. It's almost not relevant right now, but you're going to look at sketches, and all of the sketches that I have seen, and I am sure it's an accident, have been just 2 lanes on Presidential, whereas there are now 3 lanes. So I just wanted to point that out, that either that's an accident or it's correct. If it's correct, it has to be correct.
Okay, thank you. Would you state your name for the record, please? Because I don't think you did that.
Carol Epstein.
Oh, I didn't hear it. Thank you, thank you. Okay, anyone else? Anyone online? No. Okay. Any last commissioner comments? Seeing none, we will call the vote, and this is a vote to approve the tentative sketch. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I see 12 in favor. All those opposed? 2 opposed. May this go on consent such as it is for tonight? Okay, thank you. Okay, so that concludes this matter. Thank you very much. The third item on our agenda is an authorization to advertise the ordinance, Chapter 155 zoning code for various amendments for consistency with the proposed SALDO code. And for those who are following, it's on page 75 of your packets. Chris, please.
I'd like to say I have a 45-minute presentation on this item, but I don't. This is really very self-explanatory. When the commissioners advertise the subdivision land development for adoption, there's a certain cross-referencing between many of our codes. The zoning code sections reference compliance with the subdivision code, and the subdivision code references compliance with the zoning code. This is just an ordinance cleaning that all up to make sure if the subdivision code is adopted, everything's tight and works together.
Thank you. Questions, comments for Chris? Wow. I see none. So I am going to move to recommend to the Board of Commissioners authorizing the Township Secretary to advertise a public hearing and notice of intent to adopt an ordinance to amend the Code of the Township of Lower Merion, Chapter 155, zoning, Article 2, definitions, as set forth in the agenda item. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner McKeon. I didn't think this was controversial. Okay, are there any further or any commissioner comments? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this matter? Any online public comment? Okay, seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I see 14. Any opposed? 13. Commissioner Courtney, did you vote? You're abstaining? Oh, okay. So 13 in favor and 1 abstention, and we'll put this on consent. So thank you, everyone, for your attention. That concludes the business of building and planning tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. Very, very well done. And this is the point where we have a special Board of Commissioners meeting where we vote on the things that we just voted on. So I will call to order the April 6th.
For those who may have been previously confused, that confusion should continue.
Yes, indeed.
Well said.
I'll trade. Okay, well, the April 6th, 2022 special meeting of the Board of Commissioners of the Township of Lower Merion. Please come to order. Join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Bernheim.
Present.
Mr. Churchill. Here. Mr. Courtney.
Here.
Mr. Gavin. Is he not over there? Sorry, he's here. Mr. Grimes.
Here.
Ms. Sean Kramer.
Here.
Ms. Gilda Kramer.
Here.
Mr. McComb.
Here.
Mr. McKeon.
Here.
Ms. O'Neill.
Here.
Mr. Stevenson.
Present.
Mr. Whalen.
Present.
Mr. Zelob.
Here.
Mr. Sinai.
Here.
Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. So this is a section of our meeting where members of the public may address the board on any agenda items. There are 3. They're the building and planning items we just heard. Do we have anyone in the room? No. Jody, do we have anyone online? Seeing none. So we don't really have a consent because there are only 3 items, so I'm just going to do them one after another. The first is a conditional use application for 111 Presidential Boulevard, Bala, Cynwyd. And I will move that we approve the conditional use application pursuant to zoning code sections 155.66C and 155.66E1 to exceed the maximum permitted lot width required by zoning code section 155.66B3, deviate from the building configuration standards required by zoning code section 155.66D1F to not provide a building step back, and also the revised conditions 3 and 5 provided by staff that we reviewed earlier. Do I have a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Any commissioner comment? Okay, seeing none. All in favor? Sorry, Jody, do we do this by roll? Or, okay.
No.
All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. Okay, all opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Did we miss someone? Abstentions? Commissioner Whalen, did you vote on this?
He's in favor.
I was in favor. So was that 9?
9 to 5.
To 5, yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Committee of the other side.
Okay. So that item passes. The next item is a tentative sketch plan for 111 Presidential Boulevard, Bala, Cynwyd, Ward 9. And I will move that the Board of Commissioners approves tentative sketch plan dated October 10th, 2021, last revised January 14th, 2022, showing the demolition of existing improvements on the property and construction of a 5-story mixed-use building. The proposed building contains 425 residential dwelling units, 22,564 square feet of ground floor commercial space, and 676 structured parking spaces. The plan includes 19,213 square feet of public gathering space, streetscape improvements, and 18 on-street parking spaces. It also requires, no, sorry, that is it. Do I have a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Any commissioner comments? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hand. 6, 7, 8, 12. Okay, opposed? 2. Any abstentions? Okay, 12-2, that motion carries. Excuse me, and the remaining item is the authorization to advertise ordinance of various amendments for consistency with the proposed subdivision and land development code, with our zoning code. And so I will move that we authorize the Township Secretary to advertise a public hearing and notice of intent to adopt an ordinance to amend the code of the Township of Lower Merion, Chapter 155, entitled Zoning, Article 2 Definitions, to amend the definitions of electric vehicle charging station, and electric vehicle parking space, to add definitions for electric vehicle charging levels, level 3, and electric vehicle readiness standards, to remove the definition of electric vehicle charging station infrastructure, and to amend Article 3 general to districts by adjusting references to other sections of the Lower Merion Code to accurately refer to them. Do I have a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Any commissioner comments? Okay. Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that motion carries unanimously. And everyone, that concludes the business of the Lower Merion Board of Commissioners for tonight. We are adjourned.
Thank you.